This video is the 6th installment of a 7-part retrospective looking back on BBC Sherlock, TJLC, and in this video, BBC Dracula. It's intended that you watch the entire series in order. There is an annotation in the top right to the playlist for a better story, so you can start at the beginning. Also, major spoiler warning for the plot and themes of BBC Dracula. If you'd like to experience the madness firsthand, I recommend watching the show first. If I have managed to retain, or regain, or gain any credibility over the course of this retrospective series, I think I'm about to squander it with this next sentence. I adore BBC Dracula. It is currently my favorite TV show. I am not kidding. This show has so much to sink your teeth into, if you're so inclined, but I know that's a minority opinion. Most people have not watched this show or watched it and did not like it. So I'm going to try to make a case for it here and explain what it is about it that I enjoy so much. In this retrospective, I have tried to approach theorizing by making the case that a reading is reasonable rather than trying to prove that it's right. That is still going to be true here, even as we brush closer and closer to making a case that certain things seem to be intended by the writers. I'm still focused on demonstrating that reading the show that way is rational and rewarding more than proving that it's right. I'm okay with viewing Dracula the way I do, even if it's not intended. Even as I think it makes sense to wonder if it is. There is one exception. One thing I feel more or less sure of, which is the idea that we ended on in the last video, that Mark and Stephen have settled on a particular type of story they like to tell, and one of the pillars of that story is exploring the queer subtext around well-known literary figures. I don't think it's there to bait anyone. It's there because it's what they like. And for one reason or another, part of their MO involves telling two different stories within their work and in interviews about their work. Maybe they want to let their work stand for itself. Maybe they find the idea of being held even a little bit accountable irritating. Or maybe the blatant lie about Dracula being bisexual is a hint that they're doing the same thing elsewhere. That bit doesn't matter as much yet. Instead, this video is focused on what Dracula reveals about Mark and Stephen as storytellers. Because BBC Dracula, as dark as it is a very illuminating piece of work. But first, as always, let me begin by establishing some context. To prepare for this part of the discussion, I consulted with longtime personal friend of the channel, and expert in all things queer and gothic, Brontë Schiltz, who you might remember from episode 20 of TJLC Explained, the video on Wilde and Holmes. I have links below to that video, some of Bronte's other work on queer gothic literature, and the reading list she kindly provided to me for my research. If you like queer readings of Holmes, I think you'll also like discussions of gothic literature through that lens. Dracula by Bram Stoker was published in 1897 and, along with Holmes, is one of the most adapted stories in film and television. And, as with Holmes, there has been a queer reading of Dracula's story for as long as it has been around. You really cannot separate a discussion of Gothic literature from a discussion of queer sexuality. The two sort of go hand in hand. In the Victorian era, the understanding of sexuality began to shift from being focused on the act to being focused on identity, it being an intrinsic part of who a person was. This was part of a broader cultural shift at the time. Suddenly, it wasn't that you were a person that did monstrous things, you were a monster. And in the Victorian era, experiencing queer attraction would have made you a monster in the eyes of most of the public. A few more generous souls may have seen a queer person as someone dealing with a sickness needing treatment. Queerness as a pathology. That was the kinder interpretation because it wasn't your fault. This, for context, is the stance that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle took publicly. One of the only places that these topics could be discussed in polite society was through these metaphors, the madness and the monster. Both of these themes come up in Stoker's Dracula. The novel was inspired, at least in part, by Carmilla, a novella about a lesbian vampire. And, like our good old friend Doyle, Bram Stoker was also friends with Oscar Wilde. I feel like we should turn that into a euphemism at this point. Oh yeah, that writer? He was a friend of Wilde's. Hey guys, quick correction. So the situation with Stoker and Wilde is actually a little bit more complicated than that. Stoker married a woman that Wilde was formerly involved with, and despite the fact that they shared a social circle, Stoker notably did not comment on Wilde in his writing. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about this context and some of the Victorian era queer writer drama, the channel VerilyBitchie did an excellent video on Dracula's bisexuality throughout history, including the BBC version, and they even include a few details that this video doesn't, specifically pertaining to Lord Ruthven. My personal favorite part of the video is that Verity likewise tries to make sense of the contradiction between BBC Dracula as a show and Stephen's comments that Dracula on the show isn't bisexual, and they likewise come to the conclusion that he has to be lying. And I cannot tell you how vindicating it was to see someone completely unassociated with TJLC come to that conclusion looking at these writers' work. So I highly recommend that video. Please do give it a watch. Here is a very brief summary of what happens in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Jonathan Harker goes to Castle Dracula at the request of his employer. He spends a month there and slowly realizes that his host is not human. He's never attacked personally, until one night, wandering the castle, he comes across 3 extremely beautiful ghostly women. One of them attempts to drink his blood, going so far as to put her lips on his throat. But at that moment, Dracula barges into the room. I want to read you this passage. "How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast your eye on him when I had forbidden it? Back, I tell you all, this man belongs to me. Beware of how you meddle with him, or you'll have to deal with me." The fair girl, with a laugh of ribald coquetry, turned to answer him. "You yourself never loved. You never love." On this the other women joined, and such a mirthless, hard, soulless laughter rang through the room that it almost made me faint to hear it. It seemed like the pleasure of fiends. Then the Count turned, after looking at my face attentively, and said in a soft whisper, "Yes, I too can love. You yourselves can tell it from the past. Is it not so?" If legends are to be believed, one night Bram Stoker woke from a vivid dream of 3 ghostly women and a menacing man, and scrawled down the line, "This man belongs to me." And that was where the novel began.
But the one thing that remains consistent is, this man belongs to me, I want him.
What do you think Dracula's about?
It's partly about dominance and dependence, sexual relationships, but it's turned into myth, so you can pour into it what you like.
This scene is the most explicitly queer to a modern audience, but in talking with Brontë, I discovered that there is a lot more cultural subtext that a Victorian audience would have picked up on. Like I mentioned before, monsters, and especially a monster ruled by his appetites, already would have read as sexually deviant. That also goes for a member of old nobility, especially one from Eastern Europe, coming to infect and consume the population of England. Again, keep in mind we're dealing with the late 1800s here. A lot of this symbolism finds its roots in cultural biases that are very worthy of criticism. But these are the ways writers explored these ideas at the time. And they appear frequently, from what is considered to be the first Gothic novel, The Castle of Ontario, to Carmilla, the novella that inspired Dracula, to Prince Alberic and the Snake Lady. There's even a hint of it in Dorian Gray, which is a context that makes this line from The Abominable Bride notable.
Is this silly enough for you yet? Gothic enough? Mad enough? Even for you?
And I think this context is also crucial to understanding BBC Dracula. Back to the novel, Harker escapes intact, but Dracula successfully makes it to England all the same. There he preys and eventually kills a woman named Lucy Westenra, and in doing so, breaks the hearts of the 3 men who were in love with her, along with Professor Abraham Van Helsing, who one of the men of the group had enlisted for his expertise. Dracula's next target is Mina Harker, Jonathan's wife, who he forces to drink his blood. The rest of the novel consists of the gang trying to find and defeat Dracula before Mina transforms fully into a vampire. Again, the ideas of contamination, of sickness, would have read as part of the queer metaphor to the audience at the time. The same goes for another character, Renfield, a mental patient with unnatural appetites who at times is in league with Dracula and at others attempts to rebel against him. Now, Mark Gatiss, at least, is a fan of Gothic horror. He's done several projects centered on the topic. He's spoken openly in interviews about how much he loves the genre.
I prefer the supernatural, and I prefer that element of it. I love spooks and everything that I suppose they represent.
He even did a documentary specifically on Dracula in the lead up to the release of the BBC version.
Dracula, evil's own hero.
I would speculate that part of what he enjoys is the way Gothic horror plays with these queer metaphors. That is especially true given the way that he and Stephen adapted Dracula. The show is much more blatant about the queer elements of the story, which Brontë mentioned might be because they wanted to make up for the ways a modern audience wouldn't pick up on that Victorian era subtext.
I think, as with Sherlock Holmes, it's like trying to be faithful to the beats of the story and to kind of restore some of the things that have been slightly forgotten over the years. What is the essence of this tale, and what new can you bring?
So it seems that they specifically wanted that element to shine through, the inherent sexuality of this story. That's part of the appeal for them.
Frank Langella is clearly a very attractive man, and Louis Jourdan is famously a very handsome man, Christopher Lee, good-looking man. It's just, it's that thing, being attracted to what you should not be attracted to.
Sorry? I'm gonna need a minute to process that one. Here's a montage of Mark calling Dracula sexy while I recover.
In their place, a sexy, unstoppable, upright shark.
He's a very beautiful man.
Dracula made perhaps his sexiest entrance to date.
Oh my God, he's a beautiful man.
Yeah, I don't know why I thought that was going to help. Where is my bopper? I need a bop. Okay, we're fine. That was clearly the wrong place to start, but you know what? If they're gonna start the show in full unhinged mode, it seems fair that I do the same. But where was I? Why they're adapting the story, right. Apart from finding Dracula extremely sexy, apparently. You know what? Same, those in glass houses can't throw stones, but other reasons. No, in all seriousness, this is a funny bit, but a decent share of the adaptational changes do seem to be there to highlight Dracula as a bisexual literary figure. That idea even came up in one of Stephen's bi-homicidal interviews, the sexual chemistry between Christopher Lee's Dracula and Peter Cushing's Van Helsing. In the 1958 Hammer, the person Christopher Lee looks most turned on by is Peter Cushing. He's got broad taste, has this Dracula. It's not just a collection of 60s women with push-up bras this time. Dracula has never discriminated, insofar as he can tell the difference between the sexes. He goes for his food, but also people who interest him. There's a moment at the end of a Hammer film with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing when he goes to bite him, and it's very, very homoerotic for its time. That question has already been raised in the first scene that we watched last time. The idea that when Dracula said, "This man belongs to me," there was something sexual about that. And adding in the cultural context of Dracula makes Stephen's claim in that interview that he's drinking their blood, he's not having sex with them, pretty laughable. The first blood transfusions in the Victorian era were only done between spouses, because blood sharing was seen as inherently sexual. As you can imagine, a lot of those blood transfusions didn't go well because they didn't know about blood types. Just how sexy blood is. This blurring of the line between blood drinking and sexuality is an inherent part of vampire stories. From the countless adaptations of Dracula, including one spin-off, Dracula's Daughter, that, like Carmilla, focuses on a lesbian romance, and Mark made sure to bring up that adaptation in his documentary. And even something like Twilight, which is a far cry from a proper vampire story, still centers around this metaphor. It's pretty blatant that the Cullens' refusal to give in to their baser appetites and drink human blood is part of the abstinence message that the books are going for. And going all the way back to the first part of the retrospective, this is yet another Literature 101 take. Let's start with Dracula himself. You know how in all those Dracula movies, or almost all, the Count always has this weird attractiveness to him? Sometimes he's downright sexy. Always he's alluring, dangerous, mysterious. And he tends to focus on beautiful, unmarried, which in the social vision of 19th century England meant virginal, women. I think we'd be reasonable to conclude that the whole Count Dracula saga has an agenda to it beyond merely scaring us out of our wits. In fact, we might conclude it has something to do with sex. Because there was so much the Victorians couldn't write about directly, chiefly sex and sexuality, they found ways of transforming those taboo subjects and issues into other forms. The Victorians were masters of sublimation. So in the broader context of Dracula, blood sharing, vampires, and even in the context of the show itself, Stephen's dismissal is transparently flimsy. Starting the show off with asking Jonathan Harker if he had sex with Count Dracula is mild compared to some of the other things that happen. But not all the adaptational changes are about queer sexuality. In fact, the most important structural change has, on the surface, very little to do with that. This is your final spoiler warning because this discussion requires me to reveal a couple of things out of order. To sum up, Dracula, the novel, is the story of three men in love with the same woman, that woman's best friend and her husband, Jonathan Harker, and the eccentric Professor Van Helsing, all coming together to defeat Count Dracula with the power of friendship. Wholesome, straightforward, and meticulously detailed. BBC Dracula, at its core, is the story of Agatha Van Helsing and her quest to understand a monster. Not just what he is, but why. While he tries to evade, and I say this word very deliberately, outplay her. The first episode, The Rules of the Beast, is the most faithful to the source material, but there are already major structural changes. We have a new framing device. Jonathan Harker recounting what happened in Castle Dracula to Agatha. You could say that she's the audience for his story, and she picks up on the queer subtext right away. That's not the issue. It's a given. The thing that drives her is answering the 3 questions that are one question. Why does Count Dracula do what he does? What I'm getting at is that with the right framing, BBC Dracula appears to be a story by 2 writers very aware of their mythos, of how their work is perceived, what their work has done, and have essentially written an instruction manual on understanding their motivations as storytellers. There are other stories that have done this sort of thing. The Tempest by Shakespeare and The Matrix Resurrections spring most readily to mind.
They took your story, something that meant so much to people like me, and turned it into something trivial.
Applying this lens to BBC Dracula, it appears that the writers have cast themselves as Count Dracula, Prince of Vampires, the devil himself. In this version of the story, it's less that Dracula is infecting others with his queer sexuality, and more that he awakens this change in them, and then proceeds to torment them. Everyone he comes into contact with suffers, especially the brilliant ones, who he takes his time destroying. Again, reading a vampire as a representation of a person with corrupt or selfish motivations is a very basic literary take. So vampirism isn't about vampires. Oh, it is, but it's also about things other than literal vampirism. Selfishness, exploitation, a refusal to respect the autonomy of other people, just for starters. Try this for a dictum. Ghosts and vampires are never only about ghosts and vampires. In those works that continue to haunt us, however, the figure of the cannibal, the vampire, the succubus announces itself again and again, where someone grows in strength by weakening someone else. That's what this figure really comes down to, whether in Elizabethan, Victorian, or more modern incarnations. Exploitation in its many forms. That's pretty much what a vampire does, after all. He wakes up in the morning, actually in the evening, now that I think about it, and says something like, "In order to remain undead, I must steal the life force of someone whose fate matters less to me than my own." But because I'm giving you the theme before the context, I'm aware that saying that Mark and Steven are using Dracula to criticize their own work might seem a bit out there, but the final scene of Dracula makes that subtext more or less explicit. I know multiple people, myself included, who have watched Dracula and immediately wanted to go back and watch it again with that knowledge in mind. So that's how I wanted to present it to you, with the reading that BBC Dracula is a story that Mark and Steven are telling about their own legacy, and about their relationship with their audience. And not the whole audience, a very particular subset of it, one we've seen before.
We have this website. It explains the true meaning of comic books, because people miss a lot of the themes.
Also, Mr. Mellis to see you, Mr. Holmes.
Give me 5 minutes. I have a wager to win. We must certainly lose to them, because they are right and we are wrong.
This is the heart of it all, John. The heart of the conspiracy.
Oh, good. I love an acronym. All the best secret societies have them.
Which is why I kept bringing up the potential meta-commentary in the Sherlock retrospective, because Dracula makes me wonder if we had it right after all. And if we did, what does that mean? Well, if there is subtext to be found, the darkness of Dracula shall guide us to the light, in more ways than one. This reading of the show can only fully be understood in light of the final scene, and I don't want to spoil it for you yet. So as we go through the story, I'll be pointing out the scenes that are a part of this reading, but not explaining them fully. But once we get to the end, I will revisit them and hopefully tie it all together for you. For now, let's start at the beginning. We already talked last time about how this episode starts, casting doubt on Jonathan Harker's reliability as a narrator and ending on the big question.
I'm asking Mr. Harker if you had sexual intercourse with Count Dracula.
This question is never answered in words. Instead, we cut back to Jonathan traveling to Castle Dracula, and immediately we find out that Dracula and Jonathan are not the only queer characters on the show. Jonathan reads a letter from his fiancée, Mina Murray, who sarcastically says she would understand if Jonathan was unfaithful during his travels. After all, she has plenty of options too.
Your friends Reggie and Barnaby, who always seem so pleased to see me, and should I want for variety, The adorable barmaid at the Rose and Crown, who I know you have also admired.
Everyone on the show is bisexual, except for the handful of characters who are gay. I am not kidding. This seems to be part of what they enjoy in their storytelling. Jonathan arrives at Castle Dracula, wanders to the dining hall, and is greeted by his host. Jonathan is under the impression that this is going to be a quick stay, but Dracula quickly reveals that he has other plans.
You must correct my English at all times.
Your English is already excellent, Count.
You flatter me.
I don't.
I'm already picking up on some undertones. Jonathan's employer has already agreed that he'll stay for a month to teach Dracula English. Jonathan protests, but uneasily agrees after this exchange.
There will be no need to teach. Simply remain at my side and I shall absorb you.
Okay, we are doing this. Agatha likewise comments on this exchange.
Absorb. He said that.
Yes.
Dracula leads Jonathan to his room and talks a bit about the castle, that it's essentially built as a labyrinth.
Perhaps you have heard of the architect Petrovio the Widower? A monument to his lost love and the sunlight to which he could never return.
This might seem like an odd detail to highlight, but this exchange is going to come back later. For now, I'll point out that I'm getting some serious Culverton Smith vibes from this entire conversation.
No complete design was ever committed to paper.
Kept firing the architect to build us a new one. Knew quite how it all fitted together.
The prison without locks.
Murder castle, but done right.
So that's fun. I hope you like things that seem like they might be references to Sherlock, because there are a lot of them. Take this next scene where Jonathan is getting settled into his room and sets out a mirror. Dracula flies across the room to smash it. He apologizes, and Jonathan asks for a replacement, but Dracula reveals that he has no mirrors.
Baubles of vanity. What is the purpose of a mirror? One will find no enlightenment in one's own gaze.
Those of you familiar with the novel might recognize this scene. The rest of you might know from cultural context that Dracula cannot be seen in a mirror. He casts no reflection. At least, that's usually the case. Mark and Stephen have tweaked that particular bit of lore. That question, what is the purpose of a mirror, surprisingly comes up quite a bit on BBC Dracula. And, they sure do answer it. We'll be coming back to that. Jonathan accidentally cuts himself on one of the shards, and Dracula, with great effort, restrains himself from feeding, and mentions that he must return Jonathan to Mina in one piece. But Jonathan never mentioned Mina. Nervously, Jonathan says that the injury is nothing, but Dracula protests.
Blood is not nothing. Blood is lives.
You can tell that this phrase is important because Agatha picks up on it.
He said blood is lives.
He did. Yes.
Blood is, as you might expect, one of the main symbols on Dracula. What does blood represent? We're given another clue in this same scene, when Jonathan asks how Dracula could have possibly known about Mina.
A dog can sniff stories on the slightest breeze, but perhaps in your blood. Perhaps stories flow in our veins, if you know how to read them. Blood is lives.
Blood is lives, blood is stories. The stories that make up who we are. Even without the parallels to the Sherlock intro, I quite like this line and the sentiment behind it. Back in Jonathan's story, Dracula leaves him alone for the night, saying he'll be gone until the following evening. Once he's left, Jonathan hears scratching at his window and finds a woman climbing the castle walls. He tries to skip forward in his story to the next morning, but Agatha stops him, insisting on knowing what happened that night. What Jonathan dreamed of.
You dreamed? After a day of such incident and color, how could you not? Was it Mina you dreamed of?
She continues to press. She knows that his dream was sexual.
You long for her.
One longs for the solace of home.
One longs, certainly.
But the dream wasn't entirely about Mina. Jonathan is shaken that Agatha seems to know this, but it turns out she, too, can relate to forbidden desires.
Dreams are a haven where we sin without consequence. Believe me, I know. Some mornings, I can hardly look Sister Rosa in the face.
Everyone on this show is bisexual, except for the gay people. Jonathan brings up the central question of the episode.
What you asked before, if I'd
ever had sexual intercourse with Count Dracula.
Why did you ask that?
Agatha says that it's obvious that Jonathan has been contaminated, going back to that Victorian idea. And so any contact Jonathan had with Dracula, sexual or otherwise, is relevant. Jonathan says nothing, but looks away while touching the wound on his neck where Dracula had bitten him. Again, he never answers this question in words. But this scene seems to be tying the idea of blood drinking to sexual contact, so get better at lying, Stephen. Jonathan tries to search the castle to find the woman he saw, but is lost in the maze. He wakes that evening at the dining table as Dracula comes in and pours him a glass of wine. Jonathan comments that Dracula's accent has changed, and we see that Dracula looks decades younger.
Your presence has invigorated me. Fresh blood.
Jonathan continues to spend his nights in disturbing dreams and his days searching the castle. He catches a glimpse of someone, but that night Dracula, looking younger than ever, denies that there's anyone else there.
There's no one living here.
Eventually, Jonathan's search takes him to a room full of nailed-up boxes. Inside, he finds the belongings of others, presumably people Dracula has killed. Except he finds that they aren't quite dead. Jonathan runs and finds another coffin with the name Dracula written on it. Dracula wakes up and begins to follow Jonathan. Jonathan tries to escape, but between Dracula and the horde of the undead, there's nowhere to go. He loses consciousness in his fear, and we come back to Agatha, who explains the plight of the undead.
There is a contagion, a corruption passing through this world from one sufferer to the next. There are those among us destined to scratch at our coffin lids for all eternity.
This is another change. In Dracula the novel, one of the powers of the undead is to easily get in and out of their coffins, no matter how small the opening. Here, it's the opposite. The undead are trapped for all eternity, unseen, screaming for someone to notice them and either free them or put them out of their misery. This is another element that I asked Brontë about, because it read as a pretty obvious metaphor for queer experience to me. She agreed, but also added that it kind of plays into what the audience in both time periods would have found most frightening. In the Victorian age, it would have been the dead leaving their coffins, because that meant they wouldn't be where they were meant to be at the time of the resurrection. Now, it's the idea of being sentient and trapped, slowly rotting away. This, in my opinion, is the most horrifying element of Dracula, more than any visual, the fate of the undead, the people Dracula or other vampires infect. Jonathan is full of sympathy, not yet realizing that he's already one of them. Back in the story, Jonathan wakes up in the dining room again, and we have an immediate change.
Johnny, there you are. Thought we'd lost you.
Did you catch it? If not, you'll get it soon. Jonathan looks even more worn down, whereas Dracula looks younger than ever. He approaches Jonathan and asks him for a favor.
I need you to do something.
Now, take this. I need you to write 3 letters.
Jonathan hears a baby crying, but Dracula laughs at the idea.
Sounded like a baby. Oh, no, there's no baby.
Oh boy. Dracula gets back to his request.
Now, Johnny, concentrate. 3 letters.
No one calls me Johnny.
No one.
No one.
That is true. In the novel, no one, not even Mina, let alone Count Dracula, calls Jonathan Harker Johnny, or even John. It's always Jonathan, which of course brings to mind...
Since when do you call me John?
You'd be surprised.
No, I wouldn't.
So they are aware that first names were intimate in the Victorian era, specifically calling someone John. And this was not in the book. They specifically added it for the gay subtext. And if that's what they're doing here, Dracula tries to remind Johnny that someone does call him that, Mina, but Johnny can't remember her face. He can only remember... They're really doing this, huh? Jonathan asks why he can't remember Mina. Dracula says he looks a bit drained, and Johnny points out how young Dracula looks.
And I owe it all to you. Thanks.
Like, this is not queer baiting. This is just queer. They make queer adaptations. It's what they like. And it certainly seems like they're hinting that that might also be true for Sherlock. Dracula explains he wants Johnny to write 3 letters, making it sound like he's left the castle, giving Dracula an alibi. Johnny protests, but Dracula explains what's in it for him.
Then Mina wouldn't think to come looking for you here. Do you want her to come here?
So Johnny asks how Dracula would like him to date the letters.
The 12th for the 1st, for the 2nd, the 19th, and for the 3rd, or shall we say, 29th?
29th.
As good a day as any, Johnny.
In full disclosure, the dates are from the book. Sort of. Dracula lists 3 dates, June 12th, June 19th, and June 29th. Here, the specific month is removed and they just repeat the 29th multiple times. The date Sherlock Holmes and John Watson met, and the time on the Sumatra Road bomb. So, love that. If that wasn't enough of a potential Sherlock callback for you though, the baby cries again and Johnny tries to save it. Dracula's response?
The baby! Johnny, there is no baby.
This is not in the book. There is a baby in a bag, but it goes completely unremarked upon by Jonathan. There is no gaslighting about the existence of a baby, and most of all, Dracula does not sing the words, "Johnny, there is no baby." And after series 4 being the way it is, with John's baby being the way she is, i.e. mostly non-existence, the inclusion of this line is deranged. Why are they bringing back the baby gaslighting years after the fact? Unless Johnny realizes that he has 2 choices. He can either wait for Dracula to kill him, or he can try to kill Dracula. Agatha points out that he was weakened, but Johnny says that was an advantage. Dracula didn't consider him a threat. All Johnny had to do was find the map. Agatha reminds Johnny there was no map, but Johnny says that was the crucial key.
In telling me that, he'd also told me where to find it.
What did he say?
I told you.
I missed it.
You did.
Anyone else getting "you were told and didn't listen" vibes right now?
And so when you fall over, you've got to think, I was told and I didn't listen.
I did tell you. But did you listen?
Then you're much quicker than me.
I'm not quick. I've always been slow. But the thing is, when you're slow, you know you need to pay attention. It's the clever ones who never listen.
Johnny points out that Agatha has already read all this in his account, but she says it was a little vague on the details. Johnny explains how he knew there must be a map. Remember how I said that Petruvio, the architect, was going to come back?
The Count said there was no map, but Petruvio was an artist, and artists always wish to be understood.
So this was the moment that made me take the subtext I was picking up on in my first watch a bit more seriously. Because having a character look back towards the camera while saying artists always wish to be understood strikes me as the sort of thing that artists desperately wishing to be understood through their work might do. And what might they want the audience to understand?
The castle was a monument to the architect's lost love, and the sunlight to which he would never return. And what else is sunlight but the face of one's beloved, the path to the sunlight?
Along with blood, sunlight is the other major symbol at work in Dracula that you don't already know from Sherlock. We're told part of what it means here. One's beloved. But I also want to read you an excerpt from the foreword Mark Gatiss wrote for the book Playing Gay in the Golden Age of British TV in 2019, the same period of time he would have been working on Dracula. Peter Weingard popped my cherry. Not literally, of course, but it was the wildly popular Jason King actor's startling arrest at a Gloucester bus station in 1975 that set things off. It gave a name to the strange, fuzzy feeling I'd been having for years. I didn't know what this feeling was, but somehow I knew it was secret and forbidden. I was gay. What Bourne reveals is that these moments, these queer presences, have been with us pretty much since the beginning of TV. Inevitably, most of these appearances conform to stereotype, unhappy, lonely men who often met tragic ends. Times were changing, and we saw the presence of gay men filtering into soaps and other mainstream dramas, culminating in EastEnders' gay couple Colin and Barry. Though criticized as more grey than gay, it's easy to forget the hostile climate in which these first faltering steps were made. The battles are not all won, but what Playing Gay demonstrates, in hugely entertaining and fascinating detail, is how far British broadcasting has come, and come out, into the sunlight. So perhaps sunlight is not only love. It's revealing a story about that love kept in the shadows and bringing it out into the light for all to see. It's at this point I want to talk a bit about Petruvio. There isn't much Dracula meta out there, probably because almost no one has seen this show, but one of the few I've found is Devour's John Locke's excellent piece called The Petruvian Man. In it, she argues that this story, the architect and his beloved, is actually central to the theme of Dracula, and I agree with her wholeheartedly. You can find a link to that meta below. It's a short read, but I highly recommend it. Petruvio is another character not in the book, and his name, specifically how it's pronounced in this show, might sound familiar.
What you have seen tonight is the last and positively final performance of Madame Petruva.
Petruvio, the widower. This castle was the widower's final work.
Petruvio has a secret design.
It was clear from the castle maps that Petruvio had created within his design hidden passages, possibly unknown even to Dracula himself.
And the plan all leads back to the sunlight.
Petruvio's wife was the sunlight, and he stood guard at the door.
If this is a nod to Private Life, that film being the architect of this unknown design, the artist wishing to be understood through his art, and the literal guardian of the path to the sunlight is a choice. Now, you might be wondering how this factors in, considering I'm reading Dracula as a potential stand-in for Mark and Steven, if they aren't aware of these plans. But you see, Johnny is wrong. Dracula does know about the secret passages. And who is he keeping in this room guarded by Petruvio?
I only ever have 3 brides at a time.
Brides?
His brides?
Brides, yes, I think that's the right word for it.
This room is full of brides. The women we have lied to, betrayed. The women we have ignored and disparaged.
You see, I am trying to reproduce.
So in a way, we're very much addressing an audience who don't love Sherlock Holmes the way we do, and we're trying to persuade them to do that.
Okay, as I mentioned in the introduction, Dracula in the novel does have 3 ghostly women in his castle, but at no point does anyone refer to them as his brides. And they're not prisoners. They are free to roam the castle as long as they leave Jonathan alone. Not here, though. Here the brides are locked in boxes in the room that is the path to the sunlight, trapped and tormented, and fed only scraps.
He doesn't know I can get out of the box. Don't tell him. Tell him I'm hungry. He only gives me scraps.
Yeah, that sounds about right. One of the brides drinks Johnny's blood, and Dracula kills her by driving a stake through her heart.
Stake through the heart. You see, sometimes the legends are right.
But Johnny is dying now too, and so Dracula carries him away for his final moments. Take a wild guess what that involves.
I haven't seen her in hundreds of years. Describe her to me. Is she red, Johnny?
Describe the sun, Johnny boy. Go ahead. Johnny asks why Dracula doesn't just look himself, and Dracula reveals that coming out into the sunlight would kill him.
Look for yourself. But that will burn me to dust. Good. Fair enough.
This is another adaptational change, albeit one most Dracula retellings make. In the novel, the sun weakens Dracula's powers a bit, but it doesn't actually hurt him. Here, it seems that stepping into the light would destroy the Count. At this point, Johnny doesn't want to go any further in his story, and asks Agatha why he's telling this story at all when she's already read it. She pushes the manuscript towards him and asks him to read it back.
Dracula is my master. Dracula will be obeyed. I didn't write this.
You're up all day and all night, and this is what you wrote.
So it wasn't enough to make Jonathan Harker an unreliable narrator. His written account is literal gibberish about his devotion to Dracula, because Dracula has corrupted his ability to tell any other story. Love that! Back on the roof, Johnny begs for his life, saying he'll do anything if Dracula lets him go. Dracula goes along with it.
But if you give me your word that you won't try to stop me, I'll spare you. It's a trick.
Not more tricks, please. Johnny does pull himself up and makes his declaration.
If you let me live, then I will do everything in my power to stop you.
That's my Johnny.
And in case you hadn't picked up on it already, we learn here that Johnny is undead. Agatha already knew this. She's mostly curious as to how he escaped. Johnny comes back to life so quickly that it catches Dracula off guard. He's clearly impressed.
Stay. Stay.
You could be my finest bride.
This is so gay. And also the fact that Dracula calls Johnny, the one to figure out the secret design, the one being gaslit about the existence of a baby, the one who can't remember his life before Dracula, his bride, apart from the obvious queer implications there, does tie back to the potential meta-commentary here. What Mark and Steven do to their audience. And he's a man, so they might have corrected themselves a bit. It's like they're saying, bride is a gender-neutral term, actually. Johnny is furious that Dracula compares them and turns around. Dracula screams and Johnny falls into the river below, where he's eventually carried out to sea. Johnny asks why he was brought to Agatha, and she reveals this topic is of interest to her, which Johnny points out is a bit odd for a nun.
We can discuss my imperfectly suppressed fascination with everything dark and evil another time.
Agatha is focused on why Dracula screamed and works out what happened. Johnny was facing the sunlight, which reflected off the cross he was wearing, and that's what hurt Dracula. Johnny points out that he had tried to use the cross on the bride to no effect, but Agatha doesn't care about that.
Dracula, prince among vampires, fears the cross. God is real and I found him at last.
I haven't pointed this out much apart from the intro last time, but one of Agatha's conflicts is that she's a nun who struggles with faith and seems to be looking for meaning through Dracula.
You have found the devil.
Now, if it takes the devil to bring me to my Lord, then I say, bring on the devil!
I don't.
Looking for something to believe in. I find this more relatable than I care to admit. Agatha also reveals that the other nun in the room is none other than Mina Murray. She had a bit of help finding her.
I have a detective acquaintance in London.
Let me guess, Sherlock Holmes. Mina gives a speech that sounds sweet on the surface, but is also reminding me of something.
I am no longer that man.
We are to be married, so let me be plain. Who you are will always be my decision.
Because I know who you really are. Will you listen to me? Who you really are, it doesn't matter.
Put a pin in that. At this moment, bats storm the convent, and one of them flies into the room and gashes Mina across the face. Agatha leaves for the front gate, and Jonathan insists that Mina take the wooden stake she left behind.
Why?
Because you're bleeding. And I can't stand it.
Outside, we get the first direct confrontation between our two central players, Agatha Van Helsing and Count Dracula. He approaches in disguise, but she sees through it.
I've studied the legends. I am fully aware that I am addressing Count Dracula.
She already knows Dracula and what he can do. What she wants to know is why. Back upstairs, Mina throws away the stake and declares that she knows the true Johnny, that he would never hurt her. The two embrace.
My blue-eyed Johnny.
But Mina is wrong. She doesn't know the real Johnny. Or if she did, that Johnny is gone now that he's encountered Dracula.
Oh, please don't. You don't need to do that. I know you don't.
And if you make the connection back to Mary's final speech, this has some interesting implications. Johnny begs Mina to let him drink her blood because he has new uncontrollable desires.
Johnny.
But I wanted more. And you know something? I still do.
Johnny stops himself at the last moment, and knowing he doesn't have the self-control to resist his new cravings, sacrifices himself. Outside, Agatha successfully provokes Dracula into revealing himself by accidentally striking on his true weakness.
The sun is down. You don't need to hide anymore. Or are you too afraid to step from the shadows?
That's the question, isn't it? Dracula climbs out of the dead wolf and spends the remainder of this scene completely naked. He is also covered in melted down fleshlights. 80 of them.
I don't know about you girls, but I do love a bit of fur. Suffer on to me.
Never would have guessed that the people who made this show find Dracula attractive. Agatha reveals that she's been using her awareness of the queer undertones of this story against Dracula.
How did you know that I was coming?
There's a man here you consider to be your property.
My bride. A bee can always find nectar.
And a trap always needs honey.
Which is fascinating. Agatha throws open the gate and tells Dracula he isn't welcome inside. To her delighted surprise, it actually prevents him from entering.
A vampire may not enter any abode unless invited in. I wasn't sure about that one. A vampire?
You unlocked the gate and you weren't sure.
Here the psychoanalysis begins. Agatha trying to understand Dracula.
Why do you need an invitation?
You expect me to tell you?
Oh, I don't even expect you to know. A beast can follow rules. I don't expect you to understand them.
Agatha is clearly filled with disdain for Dracula. He resents being called a beast and begins trying to manipulate the crowd. Agatha is not impressed and approaches with a knife. She then cuts herself, which drives Dracula into a frenzy, and she proceeds to mock him.
Do you think provoking me is clever?
I want to see the limit of your capability. The point of this experiment.
Yes, that really does appear to be the point of this whole thing. When Dracula begins to talk back, she distracts him with the bloody knife, and then continues to dress him down. So far, Agatha is winning this game, until she gets something wrong.
That is why you can't bear the sight of this. It is goodness incarnate.
For a moment there, I thought you were clever. No, that's not why I fear the cross.
It's not goodness that terrifies this monster. Agatha has also made another mistake. In trying to learn about Dracula, she's also revealed more about herself than she meant to.
Van Helsing! What is your interest in me, Agatha Van Helsing?
So the two are a bit more evenly matched than it first appeared. Upstairs, Agatha finds Mina mourning Johnny. Mina asks about Count Dracula, and Agatha reveals a bit more of what she knows.
The most successful, I mean. Dracula has learned to do it well. I think by choosing his victims with the greatest of care.
The most successful vampire chooses his victims with the greatest of care? Interesting. Agatha and Mina go downstairs, and Dracula climbs the convent wall. And I hope you're bracing yourself.
Johnny Blue Eyes.
We're still doing this.
Say through the heart, that's fine. But someone else needs to put it there. Do you want me to kill you properly? All you have to do is invite me in.
If you've read From a Drop of Water, you already know that I love this scene. Mina was completely wrong about Johnny being her man. In the end, Johnny is all Dracula's. Downstairs, the head nun leads the group in prayer, Agatha becoming genuinely moved by her newfound faith. But we already know that Dracula is inside, and soon he begins picking off the nuns one by one. Agatha leads Mina down to her study, creates a barrier out of sacramental bread, and waits.
It's all right, the screaming has stopped.
I don't know how you could bear to listen to that.
I brought it on them. Listening was my punishment.
I'm pretty sure I lived through that one, actually. Anyway, Agatha goes back to speculating about Dracula, why the rules that govern him work at all.
He can't enter a home without being invited. Why not? The light of the day would burn him to death. Why? He's terrified of the cross, and yet he's no believer. Somehow, these facts are all the same fact.
And now you know where I got that bit about the 3 questions that are 1 question. I wasn't kidding when I said that the way I approached this retrospective was completely reshaped by my experience watching Dracula. While Agatha is still speculating, Johnny comes into the room.
I couldn't stop him, Mina. I let him inside. He's inside.
In more ways than one. Agatha warns Mina not to let Johnny into the circle, but as usual, she ignores the warnings. She notices too late that her blue-eyed Johnny isn't blue-eyed anymore.
He's inside.
Why aren't your eyes blue anymore?
Not my eyes.
Just really hammering home how wrong Mina was about Johnny. Huh. And all because of Dracula. Dracula climbs out of Johnny's body. I can't believe I just said that. And then we end the first episode with this.
I've been dying to meet you.
Before we start, I want to tell you that this is not only my favorite of the 3 episodes of Dracula, I actually love it as much as I love The Abominable Bride. Those 2 for me are top tier Moffat content. It's everything you could want from them based on their style and preoccupations. You already know that I like The Abominable Bride because of the meta implications, and that's true here too, right from the very first scene. We begin with Dracula talking about stories.
Can't bear a bad book, can you? It's a commitment, it's a contract between an author and a reader, and I have to be engaged at once.
Really, it's a commitment, a contract. You 2 take that seriously, do you? And who should Dracula be talking to here but Agatha?
One only has so much time.
That's something you have in abundance, surely.
Well, more than most, perhaps. But really, it's the quality of the time spent, isn't it?
At this point, you might be asking yourself, where are we? Why is Agatha acting so friendly towards Dracula? What could have possibly happened at the convent that led to this? What is going on? And I want you to think back to the last video, the series 4 we all witnessed, the way nothing there quite added up and you just had to roll with it. And keep that in mind for this episode of Dracula. And if you get the sense that I'm setting you up right now, it's because I am. I wouldn't worry too much about that yet. Focus instead on this conversation.
Why are we talking about stories?
Because I want to tell you one. Please.
This is the first explicit reference to Dracula as a storyteller, apart from him corrupting Johnnies. And he's not just telling a story.
As you can see, there's a game in progress.
A knight is menacing a queen.
Who's knight, who's queen?
Who's black, who's white?
You choose.
It's a story that's a game. That idea should sound familiar. This is the other major idea that I picked up from Dracula and have been peppering in throughout. I hadn't quite considered how central the idea of a story that's really a game was to Mark and Steven until watching this. A game between an author and an audience.
The losing side.
We shall see.
The losing side?
Craving the distraction of the game, I sympathize entirely with sentiment. Sentiment is a chemical defect found in the losing side.
We most certainly lose to them.
Mycroft was right. This is a war we must lose.
The way this is so consistent across 2 different stories. Dracula's story takes place on his journey to England on the Demeter. This is taken from the novel, but the ship log is only 1 chapter in the book. Definitely not enough material to turn into an entire episode if they went about it faithfully. But we have fully shifted focus away from the novel at this point. Instead, the show is now all about this game that's really a story.
It's a long and complex story. At sea, one meets an interesting range of characters. I would advise you not to get too attached to any of them.
He means that. Almost everyone you meet in this episode is going to die, so brace yourself for that. Before getting to the ship, we meet a few characters already running into some bad luck. There's Captain Sokolov, who you may recognize as Jonathan Arris, the actor who plays Anderson on Sherlock, having nightmares about his last voyage. There's Dr. Sharma, who you might recognize as Sacha Dhawan, the actor who played AJ in The Six Thatchers, studying the undead, and an unnamed character listening in as a mother grieves the death of her son, Pyotr, who is going to leave town on the Demeter. As the unnamed man leaves, the priest has the mother drive a stake through her son's heart. The same unnamed man arrives at the Demeter, taking Pyotr's identity. Captain Sokolov greets the crew and passengers as they arrive on the ship. He apologizes to the man who had been in his nightmare. The last time the ship went out, there was an accident that resulted in the cook losing his hand, and Sokolov seems to blame himself. I'd keep in mind Jonathan Arris's role on Sherlock, and that Anderson was so blatant of a stand-in for fans that everyone picks up on that one. Maybe it's not a coincidence that he's playing a ship captain here. The first passengers we meet are the newly married Lord and Lady Ruthven, and Lord Ruthven's man, Adisa.
Make it a long voyage, eh, Captain?
Or it will be.
Dr. Sharma arrives with his daughter. There's also Duchess Valeria, and of course, Count Dracula.
I'm sorry, what? You were traveling openly with the passengers.
What do you think I was going to do? Lie around in a box?
It's funny because that's exactly what happens in the novel. I agree that this murder mystery at sea is much more entertaining. Pyotr tries to get into cabin number 9, but another deckhand stops him, says it's locked on the captain's orders, and that there's an allegedly sick passenger inside. Down in the kitchen, Pyotr recites his backstory to the cook, who notices that there's something off.
The way you tell your story, you know what this sounds like? Sir? A story.
And those coming to this show from a particular background will notice another private life reference in this scene.
You like it?
Needs paprika. What's in it? What does it taste like? Red pepper. That's what's in it.
I get the sense that this show was made for an audience of like a couple thousand people at most, because no one else is gonna pick up on this stuff. And most of the people who would get it are refusing to watch Dracula for very understandable reasons. It's almost sort of a tragedy, actually. I'm enjoying it at least. At dinner that night, we learn a bit more about the passengers. Adisa makes a fuss about wanting better wine. The staff assumes it's for Lord Ruthven, but Adisa is quick to correct them.
Not for him, for me. I want only the finest.
Dr. Sharma notices and takes the opportunity to ask about Adisa's relationship to Lord Ruthven.
Are you in this gentleman's employ?
He is my man.
My man?
He pays my wages. Not the same thing.
Oh, so they...
Then you have settled a dispute.
Oh My God. That translation was kindly provided by my friend Tim, and you can find a link to their Twitter in the description below. You could probably pick up on the implications without it, but you might have recognized that last sign. The literal translation of this, or this, is meeting or together. Back when The Abominable Bride came out, people wondered if Sherlock signing "this man and I are together" might have meant something. It would appear that the writers saw that speculation and went, "Oh, that wasn't obvious enough for you? Let's clear that right up." Lord Ruthven pulls Adisa aside and asks him to be a bit less obvious.
This marriage is a necessary evil. You know that. Just don't call me your man. It hurts.
So I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that Adisa and Ruthven are a John Locke mirror.
Putting my best man onto it right now.
Let me tell you this. You were the best man.
You were the best and the wisest man that I have ever known. The best and bravest man I know, and on top of that, he actually knows how to do stuff.
This phrase also appears in the Holmes canon. Holmes and Watson refer to each other as "my man." And it doesn't quite add up to me that they would include these same specific details in the same context in two different shows and have it be there to tell you that they're in a queer relationship in one story, but not the other. That doesn't quite make sense. I can only conclude that it's being done intentionally in both, for whatever reason. Dracula comes in and begins flirting with the Duchess. He asks why she's traveling to England, and she says,
"A gentleman in England wishes to write the story of my life, and Mr. Blower pays."
Remember that name, Blower the storyteller. The Duchess begins speaking in German, and Dracula is at a loss. He excuses himself and goes outside to feed off a deckhand so he can absorb the language.
Keep looking at the moon. I've no wish to disturb you. It spoils the flavor.
Dracula is just obsessed with heavenly bodies and sources of light, huh? He comes back into the dining hall and has a silent exchange with Lord Ruthven.
Submit I.
Clearly, Dr. Sharma is not the only one to pick up on his sexuality. Agatha interrupts the story to criticize Dracula.
You killed a crew member just so you could show off in German.
Oh boy, not the idea that Dracula is just doing what he does because of his ego.
You left no one at the wheel. Do you have no self-control?
Remember Series 4 and how it felt like it was just kind of being thrown haphazardly together? You left no one at the wheel? Do you have no self-control? That is a question I also have. Dracula eventually reveals that he's met the Duchess before, when she was a young woman.
Valeria, how we danced.
He invites her to dance one final time, and then kills her. Without anyone at the wheel, the ship is tossed by the waves, waking Sokolov. He has the crew search for the missing deckhand everywhere, except cabin number 9, which he orders them to leave undisturbed. They have no success, and another crew member discovers that the Duchess is also missing. The captain apologizes to the passengers, and leaves them to discuss the disappearances amongst themselves. Dracula asks where Lady Ruthven is, and Lord Ruthven says she's feeling a bit tired. The implication that he wore her out annoys Adisa.
How shall I put it? She's quite exhausted, poor thing.
Dorabella.
Dracula asks why Lord Ruthven would be away from his wife.
One can have too much of a good thing.
I've always found that too much is exactly enough.
Speaking of too much, you might want to brace yourself. Mark Gatiss wrote a book called The Vesuvius Club, which I haven't read, but I do know one passage. A moment later, he put his hand on my thigh. Well, what was I to do? For the well-bred gentleman, there was surely only one recourse. I fucked him. This scene from The Vesuvius Club has already been connected to this scene from The Sign of 3.
I don't mind. Am I?
And like with the sign language and my man, this specific detail coming back seems like a hint. Dracula uses all of the same hints Sherlock did, right down to exact words and gestures. And if it's explicitly queer here, what does that suggest? If you don't find that convincing, Dorabella leaves her room and wanders the deck. The deckhand is clearly attracted to her and lets her stay despite his orders. Dracula quickly finds her and begins seducing her. It's obvious that she knows her husband is gay. She focuses not on him, but on what he'll give her, a handsome partner and lots of children. She mentions starting a new life in America, and Dracula says that's a shame. Again, you might want to brace yourself.
Take a look in the mirror.
What mirror?
One can always find a mirror if one tries.
One can always find a mirror?
Mirrors are deeper and more dangerous magic than most people understand. Mirrors can give us space to imagine, or worse, show us the truth.
Mirrors show us the truth. Okay. You might have wondered why in the retrospective I couldn't quite let the idea of mirror characters go. This is why. In the novel, Dracula casts no reflection. There is no magic to a mirror. But here, in a Moffat adaptation, Dracula knows mirrors are deep and dangerous. So back to that question, what is the purpose of a mirror? To give us the space to imagine, or worse, show us the truth. And one can always find a mirror if one tries.
Mrs. Turner next door's got married once.
You want to have a drink?
You wouldn't like me all that much.
I knew Westy, he was a good man. He was my good man.
No. Works for me. Everything works on you.
Tell me.
Don't make me compete with Sherlock Holmes.
I don't know how we sleep nice. Do you, Gary?
Like a baby. Is it serious, you two?
Yeah. What have you done? Oh, God. Is it serious?
Well, I'm moving on.
To be honest, I'd love to have gone further, but I thought, no, this is special. Let's take it slowly.
Mr. Holmes, you and I are similar, I think. Yes, I think we are. You and me. We would never do that to John Watson.
This is the work of a single-minded person. Isn't that right, Lady Carmichael? Have you ever wondered if your wife was a little bit out of your league?
Every day as they tore into me,
Once you've opened your heart, you can't close it again.
Sex. How did you know I wasn't getting any?
It's all about the blood.
So the implication here seems to be that we were right. BBC Dracula seems to have been written with a very particular audience in mind, and is apparently making every effort to reassure that audience that the things we saw were intentional by making them much more blatant. The queer subtext, the specific techniques being used, even the game going on between Dracula and Agatha, these seem like deliberate choices, deliberate clues. And I admit, I might be wrong, but if there is meaning in this story, it's to tell you that there's also meaning in the other. Count Dracula reveals he was only giving Dorabella a glimpse of that happy future in the mirror as a final gift. He kills her as well. Inside, Dr. Sharma is having flashbacks to the undead person he encountered. He vows to keep his daughter safe at any cost.
I will never let them take you. I swear it.
After he's asleep, his daughter wakes to find blood dripping on her face. She wanders up to the deck and finds Dracula killing Dorabella. Agatha mocks Dracula for going through his victims too quickly, but Dracula calls himself a connoisseur. He savors all types.
Like a connoisseur in a wine cellar, one chooses one's vintages with care. The reds and the whites, I enjoy both. The Duchess and the Deccan.
I've seen that metaphor before, too.
I see where you're going with this. I do drink red wine, but I also drink white wine. I like the wine and not the label.
Dracula is bisexual by every means short of actual speech. The following morning, everyone aboard comes to the conclusion that something nefarious is going on. Dracula addresses the room.
There is a killer on board. In plain sight.
Safest place to hide. Plain sight.
They really just only write one story. Dracula asks Captain Sokolov about cabin number 9, and under pressure, Sokolov agrees to search the cabin. Alone. Agatha asks the same question you probably have right now.
I don't understand. You wanted them to search number 9? I assumed number 9 was your cabin.
Did you?
We don't see what's inside, but whatever it is, it smells terrible. The captain says the passenger remains sick, and that there is no one else in the room. The crew take his word for it, for the time being. That night, the captain again addresses everyone aboard.
Trust, once lost, cannot easily be restored. I know that.
Trust, once lost, cannot easily be restored. They begin to make a plan for how to survive the rest of the journey when one of the crew members falls from the rigging above and injures his leg. The sight of blood drives Dracula into another frenzy, and Agatha comments on it.
It's not just sustenance, it's an addiction.
Blood is lives, blood is stories, blood is an addiction. As Agatha is speaking, Dracula smiles.
You're smiling.
After 400 years, it's nice to be understood.
Well, I have heard that artists always wish to be understood.
Oh no, I haven't understood you yet. Not completely.
Dracula flees to the dining hall, thinking he's alone, and nearly reveals himself to the other passengers.
Good evening, Count Dracula.
Again, there's an unspoken something going on between Dracula and Ruthven. They begin discussing how they all ended up on this ship to begin with, and it comes out that they were all recommended the ship by the same person.
I'm sure Mr. Blower has his reasons.
What did you say? Blower?
Yes, my silent partner.
And my sponsor.
That is quite a coincidence.
Well, you know what we say about coincidence.
What do we say about coincidence?
The universe is rarely so lazy.
It wasn't a coincidence, it was a plan. I haven't mentioned this concept yet in this retrospective, but for any TJLC homies in the audience, I would like to point out that this next conversation between Agatha and Dracula is the midpoint of BBC Dracula, the monster revealed.
Ah, the beast revealed. A sophisticated gentleman, nothing more than a veneer.
The sophistication of a gentleman, Agatha, is always a veneer.
They sure do talk about hiding themselves quite a bit. Agatha has picked up on who Mr. Blower, the storyteller from earlier, really is.
Mr. Who?
Dracula, a corruption of the Latin Dracul, meaning dragon, in Romanian, Blower. The purpose of an alias seems to have eluded you.
I thought it was clever.
Ah, you'll have to be cleverer than that.
Yeah, guys, it's getting a bit obvious at this point. What are you gonna do, just state the purpose of the show next?
The boat was a dress rehearsal for life in England. Mr. Blower, your restraint was failing you. You see? Not the losing side.
Not on the losing side after all. Are you saying that this is a game that Agatha must win? The closer Agatha gets to understanding Dracula and his motivations, the closer she is to winning the game, no matter how impossible the odds seem. Back on the boat, Dracula can't resist the siren call of the deckhand's injured leg. Like with Johnny, he makes the man dream of someone he's attracted to while he feeds.
Hush. Hush now.
Food should never answer back.
Food and sex. Why do I feel like there's some kind of connection there? Literally, it is all the same tricks. The remaining crew, apart from Victor, Pyotr, and Sokolov, flee using one of the lifeboats, and the remaining members decide it's time to finally search the one place they haven't looked yet.
Who is in cabin number 9?
We cut back to Agatha, who suddenly seems out of it. Something has gone wrong.
When did I lose so many pieces? I was winning.
No. You've been losing from the start.
Oh boy. Flashbacks to the final problem, anyone? Agatha is undeterred, continuing to strategize how she might still win, but Dracula wants her to focus on what's actually important.
Forget about the chess and concentrate on the game. Who was in cabin number 9?
So if chess wasn't the game, what was? Well, solving the story, and realizing that she herself was part of the story being told. Agatha finally asks the question the audience did at the start of the episode.
How did I get here? We were at the convent. You let Mina go.
But I didn't let you go, did I?
What is this place?
Surely you know where you are.
I told you I was setting you up. Series 4 of Sherlock was a nonsensical mess where if you tried to make sense of what was happening in a literal way, you were going to be frustrated. This episode pulls the same trick, starting with a scene that makes no sense. But here, it's a clue.
People you feed off, you make them dream.
The kiss of the vampire is an opiate.
Are you drinking my blood?
The surreal nature of this entire chess game sequence was intentional, because Dracula is savoring Agatha's blood.
So much insight, wit, learning. One does not hurry such a vintage. I've been making you last.
Yeah, no kidding, you've been making it last. Jesus. If this is actually Mark and Steven talking to their audience, this is the single most unhinged thing I have ever had to witness. At least they're painting themselves as the villain. Agatha finally solves the game.
It's me. I'm in cabin number 9.
The crew storms into the room, and Dracula has already framed Agatha.
Those weren't here before.
Trophies. Trophies, exactly. As if all this was nothing but a sick game.
Will you please stop talking about games? They drag Agatha outside and prepare to hang her, despite the protests of Sokolov and Dr. Sharma. The crew asks why Sokolov is intent on protecting her, and he admits he's been given a commission.
A commission? From a man named Blower, perhaps?
She needed to travel to England for treatment, and he paid handsomely for the Demeter to take her. To take you!
I am not Mr. Blauer's bride!
Can you please stop referring to all the victims as brides? God. Agatha is as quick as ever and again uses her knowledge of Dracula against him, even going so far as to use his own lines.
I'm a vampire! You will be the first that I feed on, and I will make you last.
It doesn't quite succeed.
Which of you has the courage to kick away the Baron?
But Agatha still knows Dracula's weakness.
Can't cut your tongue.
Biting my lip. I'm not a vampire. He is.
Dracula almost talks his way out of it again, but Dr. Sharma's daughter comes up and uses sign language against him.
Clever girl.
Dracula flinches away and laments the fact that his fun is over.
I was so enjoying this voyage. And the people.
And I made a good detective, don't you think?
Will you guys please just stop? For 1 minute even? No? No, of course not.
I have a particular gift for eliminating suspects.
Everyone rushes to save Agatha, and Dracula gets away. She berates them for focusing on the wrong things.
We were helping you.
Well, in future, get your priorities right. There's a vampire on board this ship.
As ever, her focus is on figuring out Dracula. She knows what matters here, and she officially takes the reins.
Captain Sokolov?
Yes.
You are relieved to command.
If the casting of Jonathan Arris is intentional, I do love that bit. The type of fan who ought to be in charge is the one focusing on the author and his plan. The remaining passengers begin searching high and low for Dracula. Lord Ruthven goes with Dr. Sharma, who reveals his knowledge of the undead. Ruthven seems intrigued.
The Nosferatu. There are such things. Dracula put us all on his ship together for a purpose. I wonder what he sees in me.
Sharma is focused on his daughter, and so doesn't notice Ruthven's preoccupation. He reveals his plan to keep her safe.
This, a last resort. There is death. And there is undeath.
Ruthven doesn't seem perturbed at the idea of undeath.
He's a very persuasive man, the Count. One might almost say seductive.
He flatters himself that he knows why Dracula picked him.
Perhaps that's what the Count sees in me. A partner.
With that thought, he lets Dracula into the room, and the two flirt with one another.
We are partners. I should like that to continue.
For how long?
Sharma is horrified. More by the betrayal than the gay flirting. He was fine with it earlier, after all. Sharma and his daughter hold up crosses, but Ruthven holds Sharma at gunpoint to get him to drop it. Sharma doesn't lose his resolve until his daughter is threatened.
I would see my daughter die before letting her become like you. Drop the cross, or I'll shoot her right in front of you.
What's it to be? Man of reason?
Despite his terror, Sharma can't watch his daughter die and lowers his cross. But his daughter is quicker and drinks the poison her father had left out for her.
Dracula is only a monster. You were supposed to be a man. I shall be more than a man.
I think this small exchange is crucial. I've already made the distinction that I don't think what makes Dracula a monster is his sexuality. Johnny, Mina, Adisa, and Agatha are all queer and not monstrous. Instead, there's something else. Something that was also lurking in Lord Ruthven. Ego, vanity, the desire to live forever at the cost of everyone around you. Legacy over humanity. This specific phrase, more than a man, has come up in these writers' work before.
There's others out there just like you, except you're just a man. And there's so much more than that.
What do you mean? More than a man?
I'm holding back on trying to tie M theory into what's happening in Dracula because we already have enough to deal with just focusing on this show alone. But if M theory is likewise being used as a form of commentary on these writers' work, I think it's fascinating that we've gone from the writer insert as a man unwillingly tolerating the villains around him as a necessary evil to the writers as the worst villain of them all. And the two characters, Mycroft and Dracula, have the same fatal flaw. Pride. Sharma attacks Ruthven in a rage, who kills him in self-defense. Dracula is put out and stalks closer to Ruthven, who appears afraid for the first time.
I thought you'd chosen me.
I chose you. For Dorabella.
Things really aren't going well for the John Mirrors on this show, are they? What does Dracula have against John Mirrors? It's either all about the Mary Mirror, or she's the one who outlives him. Weird. Piotr walks in on Dracula killing Ruthven and runs back to the deck. The crew have shoved all the boxes of dirt but one overboard, leaving Dracula only one place to rest, and are working on encircling the wheel with pages from the Bible. Piotr runs into the nearly completed circle and reveals what happened. Adiza is heartbroken.
Tears for your master. I thought you despised him.
He wasn't my master.
Agatha complains about Sokolov frowning, and I think this is the clearest indication that the casting choice here is intentional.
Captain Sokolov, please stop frowning.
How did you know I was frowning?
It's audible.
Anderson, face the other way. You're putting me off. What? My face is?
Even leaving that aside, man, they just will not shut about Sherlock, will they? Sokolov asks if this plan worked before. How did Agatha end up on this ship to begin with?
So what happened?
Dracula gained entry by disguising himself in the skin of another.
All eyes fall on Piotr, who entered the circle before it was complete. They ask him to leave the circle to prove he's himself, and reluctantly he does.
That was hilarious.
Dracula begins taunting the group the same way he did at the convent. This time, it's Adiza who responds.
Surely it's better than this dreary stalemate.
Not a stalemate. We have an advantage over you. Or at least, I do. I'm not a lunatic.
Dracula is apparently fascinated by his skepticism and begins provoking him. Agatha tries to be the voice of reason, but Adiza is too emotional.
This man killed Tom. Lord Rivani. He took the love of my life, and I will not play his games.
Can you please stop talking about games? Dracula tells Adiza that he threw Lord Ruthven into the sea and challenges him again.
What do you see before you?
A man.
Only that?
Less than that.
More than a man, less than a man. Adiza is right about that part at least. Agatha tries to keep Adiza safely in the circle, but Dracula is a better manipulator.
Do as they tell you, as you always do, because that's what you're good at, because you're a servant. However stupid your masters, or however beautiful, you're destined to remain in the shadows. A guilty secret.
There's that idea again. Destined to remain in the shadows, a guilty secret, the lover who cannot be brought into the sunlight. It's a painful thought, and it provokes Adiza into leaving the circle. He shoots at Dracula to no avail, and Dracula kills him. The group attacks, and after a struggle, they get him pinned to the deck. Agatha picks up one of the lanterns and deals the final blow.
Dracula! Go to hell.
Iconic! The 4 remaining passengers continue their journey to England. Agatha can't stop checking that final box of dirt, though.
When will you accept that you've won?
When I'm dead?
You'll want to remember that line. It's important. Agatha then reveals that she's been infected by Dracula. She plans to blow up the ship before reaching England. She orders Sokolov not to tell anyone where the ship lies as a precaution. Sokolov and Agatha embrace.
I'm a nun.
You mentioned.
Audience stand-ins have to stick together, you know? Piotr protests that they shouldn't leave Agatha behind, but it's necessary.
Sister Agatha?
God will take care of Sister Agatha. If God knows what's good for him.
I love that line. Alone on the boat, Sister Agatha tries one final attempt at prayer.
Suppose there's time for one last attempt at conversation. One hopes that there's room for negotiation on suicide as a mortal sin.
But there's a sound, and Captain Sokolov walks in, having chosen to stay behind.
Going down with the ship. I learned a long time ago that's the captain's job. One for the road.
One for the road.
Sister Agatha is about to join him on the deck for one final celebration when she notices that the bed in Dracula's room is filled with dirt. He did have another place to hide after all. She leaves the room to find Sokolov bleeding out on the floor.
I believe the plan was for a drink on deck. I hope I'm a reasonable substitute.
Agatha approaches Sokolov's body and discovers he's still alive. He asks Agatha to distract Dracula while he lights the explosives.
Keep him talking.
And so Agatha goes to the deck for one final conversation with Dracula. They talk again about their game.
I really thought we'd won.
If it's any comfort, Agatha, you came closer than anyone.
She came closer than anyone. Then the conversation turns back to Dracula and his fear of the cross. He offers an explanation for why it terrifies him.
It's not a symbol of virtue and kindness. It's a mark of horror and oppression. And I have been imbibing the blood of those same peasants for so long, I have absorbed their fear of the cross.
Which, as explanations go, makes sense. He does absorb the lives of people through their blood, but it's not the right answer.
No, I mean, that's all very nice and logical, but that's not the reason.
How does Agatha know?
Because I think, Count Dracula, I'm coming to know you. I know when you're lying.
Dracula? Lying about his motivations?
Why would I bother lying to you?
You wouldn't. It's not me to whom you're lying.
It's not me to whom you're lying. Dracula realizes that it's odd Agatha is having this conversation with him at all. Just as Dracula is beginning to catch on, there's an explosion from below. Agatha is triumphant, even as Dracula attacks her.
Go ahead. I win. The last thing your eyes will ever see is the contempt in mine.
I hope that caught your ear. If this is a story about a game, the game the two men who wrote it are playing, we want to pay attention to how the game can be won. This is what Agatha considers a victory after everything Dracula has done. They're both destroyed, and the last thing he sees is her contempt for him. I also find it noteworthy that the closest anyone comes to defeating Dracula is when Agatha and Sokolov work together. The ship goes down, and on the lifeboat, Victor and Pyotr talk about what they'll do now.
We honor them by telling their story.
Pyotr also finally reveals his real name.
Marius.
Marius?
That's my real name. That's what my friends call me.
So part of victory is an unveiling, the revelation of who someone really is under their facade. But Agatha and Sokolov's efforts weren't quite enough. Dracula claws out of his box, surfaces, and finds himself at last in England. But there's a twist.
Welcome to England, Count Dracula! What kept you?
I mean, of course, right? It wouldn't be a Moffat adaptation if they didn't bring the literary figure into the modern day, would it? Time for the grand finale. From what I can tell, even among the minority of people who actually enjoyed BBC Dracula, almost no one likes this episode. One review I saw went so far as to say that while the first two episodes are fun and clever, the third is completely devoid of theme. Personally, I'm swimming in theme up to my eyeballs over here, but I can see where if you aren't approaching this episode in a certain way, it's not going to make sense. It's sort of like The Abominable Bride in that regard, but if you're approaching it through the meta lens, this is where everything comes together. The best argument that Dracula is a story telling you how to understand its writers. Like a dark compass pointing true north. What's true north? I don't think anything can prepare you for the answer to that question. It has to be experienced firsthand. As much as I adore this show though, this episode has two lines that are absolutely terrible, and one of them is in the very first scene, so it's kind of a high barrier for entry. You have to be willing to push through that to get to all the thematic goodness. So let's get that out of the way. We finally get to see what happened that night at the convent after the camera cut to black. Mina didn't just get away. Agatha sacrificed herself to save her.
Under no circumstances are the two of us. Take Mina, lose me.
Dracula is surprised.
You die to save this terrified child.
There's a nobler purpose to my life than simply prolonging it. Settle for her, or take me and learn something.
Dracula thinks over the offer and then tells Mina to run. He then starts going on about how he's going to savor Agatha.
I am going to make you last. You'll be part of me. You'll travel to the new world in my veins.
Again, it's not just that he kills people, it's not just the blood for its own sake. Blood is lives, blood is stories. That's what he feeds on. And the best of them, he takes his time with. Agatha shuts him up with horrible line number 1.
Come, boy. Suckle.
Yeah, thankfully that's over with now and we can get to the good stuff. We find Dracula approaching the bed of a sleeping woman, unable to reach her because of the sunlight. She wakes and asks him to close the curtains, thinking he's her husband, but quickly realizes her mistake. Thankfully for Dracula, she assumes he's a friend of her husband's.
You're a friend of Pop's. Oh, God, did you have to bring him home? Sorry.
He invited me in.
She's wearing a cross, so he can't get any closer, and goes back downstairs. A few minutes later, she comes down to find Dracula entranced by the TV and asks what's going on.
What the bloody hell is going on? Shh. What have you done to my fridge?
Pop's in the fridge.
He's more focused on the television.
So beautiful.
I want you to guess what he's watching. I'll give you a second to think it over. Have your answer? If you said the sun rising over a field of grazing elephants, congratulations! You are correct. Elephants in the path to the sunlight. Of course. We couldn't have an entire show without any elephants, could we? They don't even have Arwell as an excuse for this one. Are you happy to finally have your moment in the sun? This pleasant moment doesn't last long. The fridge starts rattling, and the woman, Kathleen, is horrified.
He's alive.
Oh, please, you mustn't worry. He definitely isn't.
At this point, Dracula looks down at the badge in his hand with a picture of someone who looks just like Agatha and flashes back to his first night in the present day. He seems to instantly know what's happened.
How long was I in the water?
123 years!
Is that all?
Underwater for over a century, eh? He realizes that the woman in front of him isn't Agatha.
Not her, are you? But it's the same bloodline. Unmistakable.
He takes to the changes surprisingly well.
It's not a weapon.
No, of course not. It's a camera. May I see it? I've been around since the 15th century. Things change. You get used to it.
So he's not just a storyteller. We get a brief glimpse of Dracula as a filmmaker. He begins terrorizing one of the female soldiers, kills her, and goes for the woman who looks like Agatha next. Pay attention to this next bit.
Van Helsing. I really liked her.
By my understanding, you killed her.
Killing is healthy competition. Mercy is disrespect.
While I'm not sure I agree with this philosophy, if the idea is that it's a sign of respect to not pull any punches because you see your opponent as an equal, that would explain a lot. Dracula summons a swarm of bats and makes his escape. Back in the house, he's still fascinated with the technology around him, particularly all the lights.
I like the noise it makes. That's a nice touch.
Kathleen is focused on her undead husband, and Dracula tries to get her to feel better about his death.
He's really not worth your sympathy. He enjoyed hitting you, you know.
He takes her knife, cuts off one of Bob's fingers, rinses it, and gives it back to her. And we get one of my favorite non-meta exchanges.
I'm assuming you have staff. You're clearly very wealthy. I knew the future would bring wonders. I did not know it would make them ordinary.
That's a very touching sentiment. Generally, one of my complaints about Mark and Steven's work, even when I'm reading into it, is that they tend to push aside the more sentimental aspects of the stories they adapt, or at least hold off on them. I almost get the sense that they feel that you have to earn sentimentality, but I've always enjoyed their work best when they let themselves be earnest. But back to the scene, a literary figure marveling at the wonders of the future? Yeah, I suppose that's part of their style too. Maybe it was only ever about the technology, the ability to watch the sunrise on TV. That's what Holmes and Dracula needed in the future. You have to know that's me setting you up, right? Kathleen picks up on him saying that he's centuries old, and Dracula admits to being a vampire.
Trust the hairs on the back of your neck. I'm the reason you have them. Now, there usually are questions.
Hey, I recognize that line.
Okay, you've got questions.
Finally, we get to learn a bit about the legend from the legend himself. What does Kathleen focus on?
Do you have a reflection?
I'm sorry?
In the mirror. They don't have reflections in the films.
Or the novel, for the record, or the novel. But here Dracula laughs at the idea that he can't see himself in a mirror.
Do I look like someone who can't see himself in the mirror? Most of the vampire legends are wrong or misunderstood. The mirrors.
Okay, I'm ready. What are you going to tell me about mirrors now?
I don't see any less in a mirror than you do. I see more.
So that's what Dracula sees, his true self, or at least how he perceives his true self, a monster. Because we all know mirrors show us the truth. Great stuff. Dracula smashes the mirror and Kathleen's phone goes off, a sentence which is giving me Sherlock flashbacks. Good thing we don't have the phone heart metaphor going on in this show.
Do you have an orchestra?
Hello?
Telephone. Thank you, Bob.
Kathleen answers, something crashes upstairs, and she runs away. Dracula goes upstairs to investigate and finds a coffin with a phone inside.
Get in the box.
Dracula asks why, And in answer, Zoe Van Helsing has the men with her rip off part of the roof. Dracula hangs up and Zoe goes inside. She warns him that if she's hurt, the entire building will be torn down. Dracula manages to corner her and attempts to drink her blood.
Scared yet?
Zoe's dream is a bit more disturbing than Agatha's. She quickly realizes what's happening to her, and we get this exchange.
You're killing me.
It doesn't have to hurt.
You'll want to remember that. But something goes wrong. Dracula makes himself sick while Zoe collapses back into the mirror behind her. They manage to get the weakened Dracula into the box, and now it's Dracula's turn to dream of a terrifying figure wearing Zoe's clothes.
Look at me.
Look at me!
He wakes up to find himself within a facility, the people carrying him discussing where to take him, and he happens to see a portrait of Jonathan Harker hanging on the wall.
Straight to isolation.
Johnny.
We cut to a new character, Jack Seward, ignoring multiple calls from Jonathan Harker while he stares into a mirror. But then a LW calls and he answers right away.
Tonight, you could bring someone. You're not getting all sentimental on me, are you?
Of course not.
Sentimental is just stalking.
So, John Locke mirrors, am I right? Admit it, there are more of them than you were expecting. And speaking of getting more than you expected, all the way back in the first part of the retrospective, when I was reintroducing the symbols used in the TJLC reading, in the section on the phone heart metaphor, I mentioned that, hypothetically, the only way you could telegraph that symbol more explicitly than Sherlock did was if you had hearts literally flying out of a phone. That never happened on Sherlock. It does happen in Dracula. Anything else you feel like confirming while we're here, guys? All that's missing at this point is a reference to Appointment in Sumatra. The phone heart metaphor works here too. We see Lucy is being showered with affection while she looks passively on. We learn something about her heart from this. But I know what they can confirm next. Remember John Watson and his bisexual pride lights?
Oh, quick, one more. He mustn't see.
He sort of coined the concept. And if you look back, that might not even have been the first time they pulled this trick. Look at the background lighting in the Angelos scene.
Right, okay. It's all fine.
Which I bring up now because the rest of this episode is positively bathed in bisexual lighting. Hardly a frame goes by that isn't pink, purple, or blue. And what better place to start than where it all began? The extremely bisexual nightclub.
Streets, gonna live forever, got the world at our feet. Runting's no monopoly, no stop signs, no stoppery.
At times, it really does seem as if our opponents on the opposite side of the chessboard are saying, really? That wasn't clear enough the first time? Or maybe it's not that. Maybe it's kinder. Did we convince you that you had made that all up? Let's fix that. Jack arrives and is devastated to see Lucy kissing someone else. He and the man she was kissing have an awkward exchange where it's clear he's only interested in her for shallow reasons.
Would I like her if she was ugly?
Outside, Lucy's friend Arthur berates her for what she's doing to Jack.
You're terrible. I'm talking about Jack.
It's not like I've never shagged him. What's he complaining about?
I think he might be in love with you.
She calls him out for slut-shaming her, and we get this bit of dramatic foreshadowing.
I do. It's called slut-shaming.
Yeah, it takes one to know one.
Jesus, I'm only 22. It's not like I'm going to marry anyone.
Inside, Arthur tries to compliment Jack, but it doesn't exactly go well.
If it's any consolation, I think you're very cute. I mean, I know you're not gay.
When will people learn that straight and gay are not the only options? You are literally in a cloud of bisexual lighting. For the record, I do sort of ship these two. I like to believe that they get together after the end of the episode. Yet another John Locke mirror.
I mean, obviously, what with Lucy and all? 3 times? 4? I mean, no, I just wanted to...
After that awkward exchange, Jack gets another phone call from Jonathan Harker, and downstairs, Lucy gets engaged. Outside, Jack and Arthur bond about how ridiculous that is.
I hope they'll be very happy.
Neither do I.
And then...
Want to get a drink?
Yeah, but, I can't.
He wants to get a drink, guys! Jack, they're confirmed. I'm kidding. Mostly. Jack goes for a very bisexual car ride and then arrives at the Jonathan Harker Foundation. He changes into a set of scrubs and leaves his clothes and his phone sitting out. Zoe comes into the room and says hello. Zoe mentions that Jack had previously withdrawn from the program over a girl, and Jack says it didn't really work out. They head to a conference room where the presenter is showing how they discovered Dracula.
Basically undisturbed for over 100 years. No one realised quite how close Count Dracula's ship got to the British mainland.
How close Count Dracula's ship got to the mainland, huh? Oh boy. Dracula was asleep underwater, but when someone got close, he took a bite, and that small amount of blood was what allowed him to reawaken. Jack and the rest of the students are there as blood donors of sorts.
There is a reason it is better paid. You will have controlled exposure to a vampire.
If any of this is giving you Eurus and Sharonford vibes, I have some bad news. You are correct. Dracula is in a glass cell.
We resealed the box, so nothing could interfere with the process, and we monitored from the shore.
Good morning, Count Dracula. How are you settling in? You have every book written during your coma and somewhere to sit.
Well, I need more than books, Zoe.
Yeah, Dracula usually likes to get his stories from the source. Zoe hits a button and the titular dark compass below the cell rotates, exposing most of the cell to the sunlight, trapping Dracula in the corner. She comes in, making it clear that if she's hurt, Dracula will die.
Make any attempt to attack me, and my colleague will fully open the roof and burn you to a crisp. Do you understand?
Burnt to a crisp.
Really, it's all the same. Dracula addresses Zoe as if she's Agatha reborn, and she corrects him.
I'm not Sister Agatha. I'm Dr. Helsing, and I'm the woman in charge of this foundation.
In charge of it?
Zoe assumes Dracula is skeptical because she's a woman.
I suppose women's rights are just something you slept through.
Women's what? Did you say rights? Nobody has rights, Zoe. Man, woman, or monster. It's just a lunatic fantasy.
In case you didn't catch that...
Flying machines, these telephone contraptions? What sort of lunatic fantasy is that?
It was simply my conjecture of what a future world might look like and how you and I might fit inside it.
So, Holmes was looking forward to gay rights in the future then. Good to know. Zoe reveals why she's there. For a blood sample.
Because you're going to give blood.
This is a first.
Zoe tries to take the sample, but it doesn't work.
I can't seem to penetrate the skin.
No? Give it to me.
This moment is very important. Remember it. Dracula asks about the foundation.
Johnny was a fine man. What has this place got to do with him?
And Zoe reveals the foundation was started by Mina and Agatha's families as a medical facility, but with the purpose of keeping Dracula kept and studied if he was ever found. Dracula knows she's skipping over the important details, like how the facility can afford mercenaries.
You're withholding information. I'm giving you everything. Blood is lives. Everything is in the blood, Zoe, if you know how to read it. Do you know how to read it?
Now we're getting to the good stuff. You might have noticed that this time the conversation is about Dracula's blood, the story in his veins. Again, this is important. Zoe points out that Dracula couldn't drink hers, and he explains what he managed to pick up from it before he got sick.
You're fast, you're clever, driven. But driven by what? You hold yourself apart. Compromised, corrupt, even. Zoe Helsing, there's a shadow on your heart.
This is an interesting plot thread. It's never explained quite what's going on behind the Jonathan Harker Foundation, or how much Zoe knows. But I think the most important thing here is, like Sokolov and like Agatha after the convent, Zoe is driven by a sense of guilt, and now a sense of desperation. She's dying. She has cancer. That's why Dracula couldn't drink her blood. It's poisonous to him. This conversation is interrupted by a new arrival.
What is it? Who's this?
Oh, hi, Frank.
Sorry, yes, hello. Bit late, trains.
Mark, I swear to God. This is the reason I keep going on about Mark and his godforsaken trains. I went into this show prepared for the Mark Gatiss cameo, expecting it even. And then by the time I got halfway into episode 2, I had completely forgotten about it. So this moment was the biggest jump scare on the show for me. And it's Mark coming in and apologizing because trains are always late.
You wrote your own version, as I remember. Appointment in Sumatra.
You mentioned Sumatra Road, Mr. Holmes, but it all got tied up in legal disputes, so they never built the station on the surface.
Give me 5 minutes. I have a wager to win. Better make that 15.
Oh, but it gets better. In the intro, I mentioned that one of the characters in Dracula the novel, Renfield, who, like Dracula, wanted to feed on the lives of others, and was working with him for most of the book.
Who are you?
Sorry, that's rude of me. This is Frank Renfield. We've been, Skyping.
Mark certainly knows how to pick his cameos, doesn't he? Also, we never get a first name for Renfield in the book. In fact, his initials are RM, but they gave him the first name Frank. What's next, guys? Ernest? Zoe is understandably confused as to how Dracula was able to make a Skype call.
You're online, you're not supposed to be online.
Well, don't you know how these things work? Terribly clever.
Who gave him the Wi-Fi password?
Well, it's my name.
Literally the same show. So just who is Renfield?
I'm Count Dracula's lawyer.
His what?
His lawyer.
His lawyer?
Sorry.
Mark literally cast himself as the devil's advocate. I mean, of course he did.
I think you might have forgotten, Dr. Helsing. Count Dracula has rights.
This show is bananas. Someone gave Mark and Steven literal millions of pounds to inflict this on the world. After Dracula, I am suddenly much more open to the idea that they basically get handed blank checks and are told to just do whatever they want. And you know what? Good for them. Zoe tries to insist that Dracula can't leave, but since the murder on the beach was covered up by the Harker Foundation, her hands are sort of tied. And so Dracula is free to go. Before he does, he writes Zoe an email, which she reads on her phone while staring into the extremely bisexual sunset. He says that he was never going to stay around to be fed from donors. He picks his victims with care. And now we come to the crux of the blood metaphor.
Blood is everything you need to know, Zoe. If you understand how to read it, have you worked out how yet? If you ever hope to match me, you'll have to.
As I've been saying all along, it's not just that blood is lives. Blood is the stories of lives. Testimonies, as Dracula puts it.
Blood is lives. Blood is testimony.
And this is where Agatha fell short. She was using her brain to understand Dracula, and she came the closest, but she never had his story. Zoe now holds the key, given to her by Dracula himself. And he knows he's given her everything she needs. It seems like, on some level, he still wants to be understood, but knows she can't understand him without his help. That's why he opened his veins for her. The story in the blood of Dracula reveals the truth. Dracula steals Jack Seward's phone, and when it rings, he answers a call from Lucy Westenra.
Hello, Lucy Westenra.
And so he has his next victim. Meanwhile, Zoe has a dream of Agatha and Dracula at the convent, and meets Agatha's eyes with horror. We skip forward a few months to Lucy Westenra's extremely bisexual bachelorette party.
That last one tasted like furniture polish.
Like, we get it. You could tone it down a little. I mean, I'm one to talk. Her friends notice her texting someone and snatch away her phone.
What?
Just texting.
I know that face.
Just texting.
Just texting.
Same show. Meanwhile, Renfield is trying to help Dracula find his next victim, but Dracula's a bit distracted texting Lucy.
Will you be hungry later? Is that an offer? Lucy Westenra, you're getting married. Yeah.
Renfield is understandably frustrated.
I am trying, Dark Lord. I do sometimes wonder what it is that you actually want.
I mean, you ought to know, Mark. Oh, by the way, that vampire text?
I do sometimes wonder.
Same exact show. A few hours later, Lucy arrives at the hotel with Arthur and texts Dracula again. Arthur notices it's a little odd.
Maybe I'm saving myself.
For dinner. For D. Who's hungry at this time of night?
Well, you see, Arthur, maybe the food is a metaphor for something else. Just throwing that idea out there. Though, in this case, that something does involve sustenance. Arthur asks Lucy if she's sure about getting married, and she says yes, even though it's obvious that she doesn't care about Quincy. She seems to have other plans.
Marriage is for life.
Yeah, but
Life isn't forever.
Lucy leaves the hotel to meet Dracula at the, again, excruciatingly bisexual graveyard, where Dracula is swiping through Tinder trying to find his next meal, if you know what I mean.
Tart.
Yeah, can we go back to that quote from Stephen again? He's not actually having sex with anyone. He's drinking their blood. You might need to delete your Tinder if that's what you think. Dracula has always fed off men and women. Come on, Stephen, you have to do better than that if you want to be convincing. Then again, maybe that wasn't your goal. Dracula and Lucy chat a bit about the graveyard, and Lucy reveals that she wants to be cremated. Dracula is horrified.
Listen to me. Do not let them burn you.
I will burn you. I will burn the heart out of you.
Why not?
It hurts.
Same exact show. In this scene, we learn that Lucy literally could not care less about anything. Dracula reveals that there are sentient people trapped in their coffins beneath them, and she is completely unfazed.
The children of the night. What music they make.
And then we get horrible line number 2.
Bluffer.
Beautiful. He means you.
In fairness to Mark and Stephen, Bluffer Lady is from the book, so they get a pass for that. They did play Come Boy Suckle twice, though. Even seeing an undead child and being warned it would follow her home, Lucy is super chill.
You really don't care, do you? The perfect fruit.
Back at the hotel, Arthur wakes up, sees that Lucy is missing, and pulls up his friend locator app on his phone. Because, you know, that's what phones are for. In the graveyard, we get a hint for the cause of Dracula's preoccupation.
In a world of traveled roads, death is the last unprinted snow. Aren't you afraid of anything? Even dying?
Everybody dies.
Lucy gives Dracula permission to drink her blood.
Special treat.
What do you want to dream about tonight?
We've come a long way from Dracula trapping his brides in boxes. I mean, he's still killing people, but there is a definite softening of Dracula over the course of the story. And I think the reason is that Dracula absorbs the traits of his victims, and the two we see him feed on the longest are Johnny and Agatha, who are both good, selfless, and brave. Dracula never becomes a good person, never gains a full respect for human life, but I think their influence is the reason why his story will end the way it does. Dracula's brides alter him just as much as he altered them. Renfield sits in a car nearby, completely mixing up his Victorian novels.
Unscrupulous doctor deployed Tanner's knife to a letter. Dracula is my lord.
That's Frankenstein, not Dracula. Come on, Mark. How will you make a BBC Victor at this rate? He can only write by the rules of the beast, I guess. Just like Johnny. Arthur finds Lucy collapsed and drained. And this time, she's not recovering. Arthur asks Jack to see her, and after checking her pulse, notices the wound on her neck. He calls Zoe at the Harker Foundation, only to discover that she's resigned. She's dying. We see her in the bisexual hospital with a nun in the room who she asks to leave.
Sorry, no offense, but I am really not a believer.
But the nun isn't really there. Jack comes in and the two chat for a minute before he reveals why he's there. Zoe thinks that if it is Dracula feeding on Lucy, he must have chosen her for a reason. But Jack says there is none.
I love her, but she's a perfectly ordinary girl. She can't be. What keeps him coming back for more?
That's the question. That night, the undead child from earlier comes into Lucy's bedroom. I'm assuming that Dracula let the child in because he's immediately at the window asking to be allowed inside.
May I come in?
She gives her consent, and Dracula stabs the child through the heart. Lucy points out what she's done to him, but he doesn't care. And really, neither does she. Yet.
So beautiful.
I'm as white as a sheet.
As the last unprinted snow.
He drinks her blood one last time and kills her. Only like Johnny before her, she's not dead. She's undead. And we get another glimpse at the deep and dark magic of mirrors.
Hush, Lucy, you're mine now.
Mirrors show us the truth. Unfortunately for Lucy, she didn't take Dracula's advice about cremation, and her coffin is placed in the incinerator to be burned unalive, while the happiest pop music in the world plays over the scene.
It's like I can hear her.
She eventually breaks out and gets her revenge.
Did you put me in the fire?
To be fair, Dracula did warn you. Meanwhile, Zoe, almost to the point of death, begins seeing Agatha. If I had to rank my favorite scenes on Dracula, this one would break the top 3. The other 2 are Dracula and Agatha's chess game and the final scene. Zoe asks what's going on, but Agatha, as ever, is focused on understanding Dracula.
So, we know 3 things. These 3 things must be one thing, much tidier. God is always tidy. Well, according to his own account.
Finally, the 3 questions that are one question. Agatha reveals how Zoe can see her at all. Her life was in Dracula's blood, and when Zoe drank it, she absorbed what was left of Agatha. Agatha offers an explanation about their DNA allowing them to bond more easily, but the how isn't important. It's the why. Agatha and Zoe are sort of 2 different expressions of the same experience. Agatha was searching for meaning and found it in Dracula. Zoe's life was likewise dedicated to discovering Dracula, but she carries tremendous guilt over her work. Agatha again returns to the central questions.
So, what does Dracula fear? I don't know. Or what does he want then?
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
Agatha begins focusing on Lucy as a way to guide Zoe to the correct answer, but she's not having it.
What does he want and what does he fear?
I don't know. I don't care. It's not my problem anymore.
I am inside your head. I feel your guilt. You don't like to think about it, do you?
Again, we never really learn the specifics here, and I think the important thing is that this background gives Zoe something to atone for.
I did good with it.
For many years, yes. But you also brought Dracula back to life with it. So he's still very much your problem, and you know that.
At that, Zoe finally agrees to help, asking what she needs to do, and Agatha says she'll go with her. And of course, we get explicit confirmation of the reason we're here at all.
The darkness of Dracula shall guide us to the light.
And it shall. And so Zoe calls Jack, and she and Agatha leave the hospital. Speaking of truth in the mirror, Lucy likewise gazes into her own reflection and sees herself as beautiful as ever.
Luther, lady.
But the fact that we don't see her outside of the mirror should raise alarm bells. Jack and Zoe arrive at Dracula's home. He assumes Jack is there as a snack, but Jack reveals he has a personal motivation for being there.
Dr. Seward, it was his phone you stole. You might say I introduced you.
Ah, and now she's dead.
Zoe mentions that Lucy was cremated, and Dracula is briefly horrified, but gets over it fairly quickly.
No, you don't understand. She would have been conscious the whole time. Stings a bit, I believe.
At that moment, there's a knock at the door, and as Dracula goes to answer it, he warns Jack that he's in for a shock.
Now might be a good time to reflect that beauty is only skin deep.
Zoe, or Agatha, is more encouraging.
Braveheart Jack. Remember, it is the soul, not the aspect that one loves.
Dracula notices instantly that she sounds like Agatha, but Zoe shrugs it off. Lucy comes in, and we're still only allowed to see her in the reflection of the glass table. She asks who Zoe is, and again we get another hint of Agatha, which Dracula notices.
I'm not on the menu. I'm an old friend. We go way back.
Lucy asks Jack to kiss her, and we finally get to see what she's become.
Kiss me like you used to. Kiss me.
Dracula seems amused by this turn of events.
Journey's end. Lovers meeting.
That's not just a reference to Twelfth Night, it's the exact same quote that Holmes uses in the story The Empty House. Lovely. It quickly becomes obvious that Lucy only sees what she wants to see in the mirror. Lucy has the idea to ask her to take a photo, and while she still sees the fantasy in the preview, when the photo is taken, she finally sees herself and falls apart. Dracula tries to comfort her, still not quite managing it.
Listen! You're my finest bride yet. You knew what was happening. You accepted it. Now you can live forever.
Lucy insists that she doesn't want to live forever looking like this. And brace yourself, we have another Sherlock reference incoming.
Like this. Look at me!
I don't mind.
Oh, don't you?
No.
I don't mind.
Am I?
Lucy does mind, though. Jack picks up one of Zoe's wooden stakes and asks Lucy to kiss him.
Kiss me.
You don't want to kiss me like this.
Lucy Westerner, there has never been a day I didn't want to kiss you.
The two kiss while Dracula and Agatha stare at one another. Lucy reaches behind Jack's back and feels the stake he's holding. Instead of getting angry, though, she asks him to end it for her.
Zoe.
And so he does. And if you're me, this combination of being stabbed through the heart and fire imagery is fantastic. Dracula laments losing his best bride, but Jack corrects him.
She was never yours, or mine, or anyone's.
Well, I suppose she died well. That's a rare quality. You can take it from me.
Agatha asks about that, and Dracula inadvertently reveals why he was drawn to her.
She almost seemed in love with death.
That's it. That is everything.
Zoe turns to Jack and insists that he leave.
I'm about to have a personal conversation with Count Dracula, and I'm certain he won't want it witnessed.
Why not?
Because there's only one thing in this world that you're truly afraid of, and finally I know what it is.
I don't.
I know you don't.
Jack protests, but eventually agrees to go, commenting on the sunrise before he does.
It's going to be a beautiful day.
Thank you.
And so we come at last to the final scene. The one that either loses people entirely or changes everything about how they view Mark, Stephen, and their work. Once Zoe and Dracula are alone, Dracula brings up his blood.
Dr. Helsing, I think you drank my blood.
Zoe didn't actually stay to chat, though. She quickly rushes towards the window and pulls down the curtains, burning Dracula alive. Except he doesn't die. The sunlight, it turns out, doesn't hurt Dracula at all. At last, Agatha lays bare all that Dracula is.
Consider Count Dracula, who cannot bear to look in a mirror. Dracula, who won't stand revealed in the sunlight. These aren't curses. They are merely habits that become fetishes, that become legends that even you believe.
Everything that Dracula has done, the rules that governed him, were all built on a lie. Habits so deeply ingrained that he believed he had to abide by them or he would perish. But why?
What are you afraid of? You are a warrior from a long line of warriors. All of them fell as heroes on the battlefield, but not you, the warlord who skulks in the shadows and steals the lives of others.
Skulking in shadows, stealing the lives of others, and above all, terrified to face the death of a legend.
And now we know why this works. Because it speaks of the courage you long to possess. The courage it takes to die.
Honestly, of all the places they could have landed with why the cross works in this version, I think this is the best outcome. It's not the goodness. It's not the horrors committed. It's the love and self-sacrifice that terrifies him, in stark contrast to his own actions, prolonging his own life at the expense of everyone around him, like a complete inverse of Christ.
I call you ashamed. Count Dracula is ashamed.
Agatha, Zoe, is dying, but she sees that as a victory too, one last triumph over him.
You're in pain.
I am equal to it. You seek to conquer death, but you cannot until you face it without fear.
And if this show boils down to a game between Agatha and Dracula, which I think it indisputably does, this is the only fitting way for it to end.
Goodbye, Count Dracula. Shuffle back to your box of dirt. The game is over. You lose. You will live forever in shame.
You lose. You will live forever in shame. This is one of two lines on the show that will hit you the hardest if you're reading into things. We'll discuss them both once we're through the story. We're nearly there now. At long last, Dracula willingly steps into the sunlight, looking back at Agatha as he calls it beautiful.
Beautiful. Look at her. Agatha. It's beautiful.
If Dracula really were a soulless monster, this would only be the beginning. He can go where he likes now, unrestrained, no rules, no weaknesses, no fears, nothing holding him back. But Agatha has seen through to the core of him, the shame that defines him, that if he lives on as Dracula the legend, he will have lost. The camera fades to black, and then we hear flames. And we see Dracula and Agatha naked in each other's arms, fully revealed to one another at last. Agatha knows what's really happening. Drinking someone's blood is the same as having sex with them, after all.
This is a dream.
Of course it is.
You're drinking my blood. But my blood is deadly to you.
Yes.
So you'll die.
So will you.
And this, not the shame, is the real ending. Both Dracula and Agatha die, and in that respect, they both lose the game. And I have to point out that Dracula's choice here is completely at odds with the ending of Series 4. Both shows ask similar questions about who the titular character is underneath all the stories, and come to opposite conclusions. In Series 4...
Will you listen to me? Who you really are, it doesn't matter. It's all about the legend, the stories, the adventures.
Here, Dracula willingly chooses death as a man over living on eternally as a legend. That persona, that myth, has to die. And in a way, we come full circle back to that first game in the climax of A Study in Pink. It's only when that game has finally ended, when Dracula is no longer trying to outplay Agatha, when Agatha no longer has to guess at Dracula's motivations, when the truth has at last been revealed, that both Dracula and Agatha finally win.
When will you accept that you've won?
When I'm dead?
The second line that hits the hardest, the parting line of the show. One last bit of reassurance from Dracula to Agatha as they make love on the surface of the sun.
After all this time, did you think I'd let it hurt?
It's easy to forget the hostile climates in which these first, faltering steps were made. The battles are not all won, but what this demonstrates, in hugely entertaining and fascinating detail, is how far British broadcasting has come, and come out into the sunlight. BBC Dracula is the story of a living legend and the woman trying to understand him. And in light of the ending, it doesn't take much squinting to see the whole thing as a metaphor. A story written by two men burdened with shame, painfully aware of what their game has cost the people playing it, yet unable or unwilling to do otherwise. Still playing by the rules of the beast. But blood is lives. The stories that flow in our veins. And in this story about a vampire skulking in shadows and stealing the lives of others, who cannot bear to look in a mirror, who will not stand revealed in the sunlight, yet those writers have perhaps opened their veins for us, given us the ability to understand what motivates them, their love for these stories, for queer subtext, for the game, and for those quick and clever enough to play along, their regret, their shame, the sense that no matter what they do from here, they have already lost. This dark story is full of gentle reassurance, mirrors and metaphors, phones, food, and drinking, elephants in the sun, brides in their boxes, bisexual nights, and the brilliant daylight. This man and I are together, and I don't mind, and he put his hand on my thigh so I fucked him, and Johnny, since when do you call me John? And the ultimate reassurance of that ending. Dracula finally comes out into the sunlight, and after all this time, did you think I'd let it hurt? The same way TJLC makes sense of the abominable bride when nothing else does. It seems to be the only way to find beauty in this show that otherwise no one likes or understands. But viewing it like this, Dracula is lovely, it's profound, and most importantly, it reads like the promise of a better story, a commitment, a contract between an author and a reader who might not be on the losing side after all. Does that mean it's right? I don't know. I will tell you that when I watch this final scene, I find it very hard to believe that all of this is a coincidence. The same is true when I look at Van Helsing. In her, they have perfectly captured what it's like to try to engage with their work, what it feels like to try to understand. They even get at the guilt that comes from unleashing your analytical force on this, trying to make sense of the subtext in their stories without fully considering the risk, unlocking the gate when you aren't sure. I feel more seen in her character than I ever did by the brides in Sherlock. But I have to leave room for the possibility that this is all reading far much into this story. I have to, because I didn't once, and I will not go through that again. Not for a TV show, no matter how good it is. As reassuring as this subtext might seem, we all know that these writers are more than capable of letting us down. If that is a genuine question at the end, did you think I'd let it hurt? My answer is yes. You already have. I am not handing you my heart a second time. All the same, this is what I needed in order to engage with theorizing about Sherlock again. Because if there is meaning in one of these stories, there is meaning in the other. And what I think many of you who have given up on TJLC will know is that at the end of the day, one of the biggest barriers for re-entry is the implication Series 4 has for who Mark and Stephen are. You can say what you like about logistical and plot concerns, and many of those are valid. We'll talk about some of them next time, but I don't think they're at the heart of the problem. They weren't for me. The problem was the sense of betrayal. It's easy to accept the thought that the writers are evil people who baited you. Not without pain, but simple to understand and easy to believe. It's slightly less easy to accept that they just play with queer subtext. It wasn't a bait, they were just having fun, and no harm was meant by it. That's messier, but it's also not personal. But if Series 4 was part of a plan, part of a game, if the writers knew about us but still set out to take literary criticism by means of satire to the ultimate extreme and convince everyone that there had never been anything more to the story to make a point, if in any small way what we went through, what you went through, was on purpose, that is a very hard pill to swallow. In some ways, it's a more painful thought than being intentionally and maliciously queer-baited. At least it was for me. What I needed in order to be able to engage with TJLC again is what BBC Dracula provides. An explanation. An apology. That it wasn't us they were trying to convince.
I know when you're lying.
Why would I bother lying to you?
You wouldn't. It's not me to whom you're lying.
That initially, they kept to plans as a show of respect.
Killing is healthy competition. Mercy is disrespect.
They acknowledge that they have taken the game too far, repeatedly demonstrated in the way that Dracula treats his brides.
Look around you. This room is full of brides.
Brides?
Brides, yes, I think that's the right word for it.
The women we have lied to, betrayed. The women we have ignored and disparaged.
Stay. You could be my finest bride.
There's a man here you consider to be your property.
My bride.
You!
I am not Mr. Bellauer's bride!
Enough talking!
Listen! You're my finest bride yet.
They admit that they changed the rules in the middle of the game.
The losing side.
We shall see. You see? Not the losing side. When did I lose so many pieces? I was winning.
No. You've been losing from the start.
They understand the derision directed at them.
Go ahead. I win. The last thing your eyes will ever see is the contempt in mine. The game is over. You lose. You will live forever in shame.
And they, in turn, desperately want to be understood.
The Count said there was no map, but Petruvio was an artist, and artists always wish to be understood.
You're smiling.
After 400 years, it's nice to be understood.
I can't seem to penetrate the skin.
No? Give it to me. Only in blood do we find the truth, Zoe. Blood is everything you need to know, Zoe. If you understand how to read it.
That if there is intent, they intend to make it right.
It's a commitment. It's a contract between an author and a reader, and I have to be engaged at once.
Why are we talking about stories?
Because I want to tell you one. Please. After all this time, did you think I'd let it hurt?
And that's what I needed to be able to bear the thought that Series 4 was done intentionally. A hint that they regret what they've done. I don't know if TJLC is the right way to go about understanding these writers' intentions, but I do know that if it's right about one of these stories, it's right about both of them. And so Dracula now provides the framework through which I see not just Series 4, but all of Sherlock now looking back on it. And you already know that. It's been all over this retrospective. My newfound focus on the whole thing being a game. The 3 questions that are one question. The way I can't quite let go of that meta-commentary layer. These ideas are all here in my brain and here in these videos because of BBC Dracula. For me, Dracula really was the path to the sunlight. And I hope that if you decide to continue on to the final video, Dracula provides what you need to begin that discussion too. For those who will be ending your journey here, I have one last case to make. I have deliberately been very careful about the things I'm trying to convince my audience of. I hope that's shown. If it has, hopefully that will add some weight to what I'm about to say. One of the great tragedies of Series 4 was the way it fractured our community into 2 groups that have never really reconciled. Those who continued on theorizing and those who did not. I was solidly in the latter category. I disengaged entirely after the final problem came out. What I have noticed over the years is that many of us who left have the tendency to treat current members of TJLC with some disdain. Some of that comes from what happened in the immediate aftermath of Series 4. Things got messy on a personal level and so outlandish on a theory level that I think many of us looked at what was happening and asked ourselves, oh God, is this all it was the entire time? And I don't say that to make the people who were involved feel bad. I think everyone was very emotional at the time. No one was having a purely rational, calm response. But I've come to the conclusion that no, that is not all it was the entire time. I have been exhaustively arguing that case for 6 videos now. There was something more here. And there still might be. But the immediate fallout did lasting damage. Since coming back to the fandom, I have made or reconnected with friends on both sides of the aisle. From where I stand, I think both groups have some valid critiques of the other. There was wrong done, and still being done on both sides. My TJLC homies will get their turn at some gentle criticism next time, but for now, I want to say a word in their defense. From what I can tell, things calmed down after a couple of months, and a new TJLC community slowly emerged. One that I have taken part in these last few months. And what I will say is that the TJLC community that exists now is a much calmer one than it ever was. Maybe some of that is coming from the fact that it's a much smaller community, and it's still not perfect. Again, you guys will get your turn, but there is an openness to diversity of ideas, of opinions, that was not really present in the old TJLC. And the people I'm close with all have a high degree of empathy for people who cannot or will not fully buy in again, who don't want to revisit the show, or who just want to look back at the TJLC reading of the first 10 episodes and go no further. From what I've seen, there's less bickering and just as much fun, and the meta is as detailed and rich and clever as ever. My point is that I don't think there's anything to be gained from distancing yourself from the current TJLC community. If you told someone you were in TJLC but stopped when Series 4 came out, I don't think that would do anything to help your case with someone inclined to criticize you for that. This is not me saying I think you need to rejoin the TJLC community. I don't. It is me asking you to treat the people still theorizing with some compassion. Don't turn around and do to them what was done to all of us. Their worst crime is believing that a story that sets up a romance will eventually bring it to fruition. The same as yours. I've tried to encourage you to let go of any shame you might have been harboring over that. Likewise, I encourage you not to direct that shame outwards at others still hoping for that same thing. Even when you disagree, you can disagree on an analytical level rather than a personal one. Most of us are just doing our best to be good people. If you can't see the other side, that's okay. It doesn't make the people still reading into BBC Sherlock bad people. Or that if they turn out to be right, that you failed somehow by not getting back into it. It is completely understandable why you don't want to. I don't think either is an inherently shameful choice. And I suppose that's where I want to leave you as your plane touches down. There was no shame in loving what you saw in BBC Sherlock, in earnestly believing that it could be something truly beautiful. And there's no shame in loving it now, even if you feel sure that it will never lead anywhere. As I said at the beginning of the video, I'm willing to do just that for both Sherlock and Dracula. If the meaning I see and love in Dracula isn't intentional, well, then I guess I'm really really good at finding a beautiful story in Mark and Stephen's work. I can't wait to do the same for the inevitable BBC Dorian adaptation. I wouldn't describe it as loving in spite of their intent, because spite doesn't factor into it. I like their style, and I like finding meaning in it, even if I'm doing it wrong. And that's a place I never thought I could reach when I set out on this project, but I'm very happy to have arrived here. And so I hope this retrospective has helped you rediscover some love and joy too, and has helped you let go of your shame. For these last 2 videos especially, I hope you can see that even with Series 4 being what it is, it doesn't have to ruin the story for you, and that whatever was done here most likely was not done maliciously. If you want to leave it at that, I understand completely. Thank you for hearing what I had to say. For those disembarking, please make your way towards the exit at the front of the plane. It's a beautiful day out there, and I hope you enjoy it. For those of you who will be staying aboard for the final leg of our journey, sit tight. We'll be taking to the skies one final time to talk about plans, planes, falls, and landings in the 49th episode of TJLC Explained. I'll see you then.